The voice in your head paradox is what happens when the thing guiding your life turns out to be a stranger wearing your voice. You're walking alone, no headphones in, no one around, and yet the silence isn't really silent. There's a commentary happening, a voice narrating what you're doing, critiquing, rehearsing, replaying. It talks about how you looked when you passed that person. It reminds you what you forgot to say in that argument 5 days ago. It whispers something embarrassing from 10 years back that no one else remembers, but you do. Because the voice won't let you forget, it sounds like you. It uses your vocabulary, your rhythm, your tone, but the thoughts, you don't remember choosing them, they're just there. And here's where the paradox begins. If the voice is you, then who's listening? If you're the one hearing it, then how can you also be the one speaking it? You can't be both radio and receiver at the same time. But you are, every day, all the time. You listen to your own thoughts as if someone else is delivering them. Sometimes they feel right, insightful, grounding. Sometimes they feel cruel, alien, disturbing, but they never stop. That's the trap, that's the paradox. You're not in control of the one thing you think is most personal, your own mind. You don't control the voice. You negotiate with it, you reason with it, you argue, you try to explain yourself to it, but you don't choose what it just says it. You can be brushing your teeth and suddenly it says, you're failing. You're watching a movie and it whispers, you'll never be good enough. You're trying to sleep and it shouts, everyone hates you. And it doesn't need evidence. It doesn't wait for permission. It just speaks, unfiltered, unchecked, unrelenting. And even when it's not loud, it's there, in the background. Filling in the blanks, naming the feelings you don't want to name, providing the worst possible explanation for things you wish you could forget. And because it sounds like you believe it. That's the danger. You trust the voice, even when it's toxic, even when it lies, even when it's just repeating something someone else once said, a parent, a teacher, a bully. You absorbed their words and the voice took over. I'm not smart. I'm too much. I'm not enough. I always ruin everything. These phrases replay, looping endlessly until they stop sounding like memories and start sounding like facts. And still you call it thinking. But it's not thinking, it's a script. It's been running so long that you've forgotten you didn't write it. It's a loop of conditioning dressed up as insight, and the worst part, you defend it. You say, I'm just being honest with myself. But honesty shouldn't hurt like that. It shouldn't feel like punishment. It shouldn't make you afraid of being alone with your own mind. Because the voice doesn't rest. When you're with others, it compares you. When you're alone, it questions you. When you try to speak, it edits you. When you're quiet, it fills the silence. And even when you try to ignore it, it watches you do it. You're avoiding things, it says. You're weak, it says. You're pretending, it says. And it always has the last word until you challenge it, but even that's complicated. Because when you try to push back, the voice doubles down. It says, look at you trying to be positive. That's cute, or worse, it says nothing at all, just silence, which is almost worse because now you don't know what's coming. You know it's waiting, ready to jump back in the moment you relax, so you stay tense, on edge, guarded, and then someone asks, why are you so anxious all the time? And you smile and say, I don't know. But you do know it's the voice. It's always been the voice. It doesn't scream. It doesn't shout. It whispers constantly. It's the background noise of your entire life. And because no one else hears it, you think it's normal. You think everyone walks around with a narrator questioning their every move. And maybe they do, but maybe not like this. Because sometimes the voice isn't just critical. Sometimes it's vicious. Sometimes it says things you're afraid to admit even to yourself. You're broken, you're unlovable, you don't matter, and when it does, you believe it, you internalize it, you carry it like a truth, but it's not truth, it's a parasite. Thought form that gain momentum, and you've been feeding it. Every time you replay an insecurity, every time you tell yourself you're not doing enough, every time you shrink in the name of humility, you're feeding the voice, giving it airtime, letting it grow, and it grows quietly, strategically. It waits until you're tired, hungry, alone, that's when it strikes. That's when it wraps itself around your thoughts and squeezes. Until you mistake the voice for logic, until you mistake self-abuse for self-awareness. Until you think this must be the real me. But it's not. The real you isn't a thought. The real you is the spac. Between the thoughts, the part that notices, the part that feels the sting when the voice gets cruel, the part that hopes for something softer, that's you, not the voice. The paradox is that we think because we can hear ourselves, we must be in control. But the voice isn't under control. It's automatic, reactive, shaped by years of repetition and trauma and fear. And yet we let it lead. We follow its suggestions like their gospel. We let it make our decisions, dictate our self-worth. Shape our identity, and we don't even question it, because to question it feels like questioning our own minds. But that's exactly what we need to do, not with hate, not with anger, but with curiosity. Where did this voice come from? Whose voice is it really? What does it sound like when I don't believe it? Because that's the way out, not silence, not force, not pretending it's not there, but observing it, watching it the way it watches you, naming it, understanding that it's not you, it's a mechanism. A survival tool that went rogue, and once you know that, really know it, the spell starts to break. You stop reacting, you start listening differently, you say, I hear you, but I don't have to follow you. And the voice gets quieter, not silent, just less convincing. And slowly you make room for a different voice, one that speaks with care, one that forgives, one that doesn't need to be right all the time. a voice that sounds like you, not the old you, but the one you're becoming. The one who asks not, "What's wrong with me?" but "What do I need?" The one who isn't interested in being perfect, just present. And maybe that voice takes time to grow. Maybe it's shaky at first, unfamiliar, but it's yours, and it's waiting underneath all the noise, ready to speak, ready to stay. And if the voice in your head has been running the show all these years, the real question is, what happens when you finally take the mic back? The mirror paradox is what happens when the thing you trust to reflect your truth turns out to be a distorted lie you've believed your whole life. You stand in front of the mirror, you see a face, you recognize it. It blinks when you blink, tilts its head when you tilt yours, smiles when you fake a smile just to check if it looks natural. The face in the mirror seems familiar, but there's always something off about it. Maybe the shape of the mouth looks uneven. Maybe the eyes feel too still. Maybe it's just the fact that left is right and right is left. That version of you, the one in the mirror, is reversed. It is not how you look to the world. It is not how you appear in photos. It is not how anyone else sees you. And yet this flipped image becomes the one you trust most, the one you fix your hair for, the one you criticize, the one you measure your worth against. You say things like, "I look tired today," or "I look terrible," or on rare occasions, "I look okay." But the I you're talking about isn't you. It's a projection, an illusion made of light and glass, an impersonator that performs your movements with perfect timing but carries no thought, no feeling, no past. And still you give it power, real power. It gets to decide how you feel before you even walk out the door. If your reflection looks bad, your mood drops. If it looks good, you feel confident. The mirror becomes the judge, the ruler, the approval machine. But here's the paradox. The mirror isn't telling you the truth. It never has. It only shows you the surface, flipped and flattened. It doesn't show you the way your face moves when you laugh genuinely. It doesn't show how your eyes soften when you're listening. It doesn't reflect the warmth of your presence, the tone of your voice, the depth of your character. It's just a surface, but we've built an entire relationship with it, a lifelong dialogue. You stand there day after day asking the mirror the same question, "Am I okay?" And it never answers, it just shows you an image, and that silence becomes filled with your own voice, with all the things you've heard about how you're supposed to look, with all the comparisons, with every comment, every magazine cover, every side glance. You fill in the silence with stories. "I'm too fat, too pale, too short, too old, not enough, always not enough." You say you hate the mirror, but you go back to it. Because it offers certainty. Even if it's cruel, it's something, a visible marker of how you're doing, a scale for your face, and we learn this early. As kids, we start to notice how we look. We start to adjust, to pose, to check. The mirror becomes part of our identity, part of our rituals. It tells us when we're ready, when we're acceptable, when we should feel shame, when we should feel pride. And sometimes we try to escape it. We avoid it when we feel bad, we cover it. We turn the lights low. But even when we don't look, we carry the mirror in our heads. The image of ourselves haunts us. It floats in the background, always watching, always critiquing. We don't need the actual glass anymore, the reflection has moved inside. And when we do look again, it confirms everything we feared, because we're not seeing ourselves clearly. We're seeing our expectations, our anxieties, our projections. The mirror doesn't lie because it shows us something fake. It lies because we believe it's the whole truth. But the mirror is missing everything important. It doesn't see how brave you were today. It doesn't see how kind you were when no one was watching. It doesn't see the way your presence made someone feel safe. It just shows skin, shape, shadow. It reduces you, compresses you, turns you into something flat, and you accept it because no one ever taught you to see beyond it. You were taught to pose, to present, to perfect. You were taught that what you look like is what you are, but it's not. You are not the image in the glass. You are not the version of you frozen in stillness. You are not a reflection. You are motion, story, depth. You are the way you move through space, the way you make people feel, the way you carry your experiences. The mirror can't hold any of that. It's too shallow. It's not built for it. And yet every day we return, hoping it will tell us something different, hoping it will finally say, "You're good, you're beautiful, you're enough," but it won't because it doesn't speak. Stares and you speak for it. You give it a voice, your voice, and when that voice is harsh, the mirror feels harsh. When that voice is soft, the mirror feels safe. It's not the glass, it's the story. It always was. The paradox is that you've trusted a tool that was never designed to hold your identity. A mirror reflects, but it doesn't understand, it can't, and yet it's been shaping you this whole time, and you let it. You gave it authority. You let it decide your worth, but now you see it. Now you know that reflection isn't you. It's an echo, a track. A surface-level hint, but the real you has never been visible in glass. The real you is in the way you show up, the way you love, the way you live when you forget to think about how you look, and maybe the mirror will never change. Maybe it will always be there, offering the same silent stare, but you can change what you bring to it. You can change the voice that speaks when you look, because if the mirror isn't telling you who you are, then who is? And if you've spent your whole life trying to impress a reflection that can't love you back, then maybe it's time to ask, who taught you to believe a piece of glass could tell you your worth? The paradox of the watcher is what happens when you realize that your mind has split itself into two. the one who lives and the one who watches you live. You wake up, you yawn, you stretch, but you're not alone. There's something else with you behind your eyes, just slightly back from the surface of your life. A presence, an audience, a subtle awareness watching you wake up, watching you move, watching you think. It's not loud, it doesn't speak, but it's there, always there. You notice it most in the quiet. When there's no one around and you're not doing anything special, when your actions slow down enough for your attention to loop inward, that's when it emerges, the watcher. You're brushing your teeth and suddenly you're aware of the act of brushing. You're eating and you're not just tasting, you're watching yourself taste. You're in conversation and part of you is speaking, while another part is standing to the side, evaluating everything you're saying in real time. That's the watcher. Here's where the paradox begins. You're both the one living your life and the one witnessing it. But which one is you? Which one is real, the actor or the observer? The body moving through space or the awareness trailing behind? You can't be both, not completely. You can't be fully immersed in a moment and also outside of it, analyzing your role. And yet that's exactly what you do. Constantly, you split, you fracture, you live on two levels, one in the scene, one above it. It starts subtly. A small voice asking, how am I doing? How do I look right now? Is this the right thing to say? But soon it grows. The watcher becomes louder, more persistent. It's there when you walk into a room, scanning for how others might see you. It's there when you try to relax, reminding you that you're not doing it right. It's there when you cry, asking if your emotions are too much. It doesn't sleep. It doesn't pause. It just watches, unblinking, cold. It's not kind. It's not cruel. It's just there. Like a security camera in your brain, a mirror that never turns away. And because it's inside you, you never get a break from it. You never get to be unobserved, not really, not fully, and that changes things. It changes how you speak, how you move, how you relate to others, because you're not just expressing, you're performing, you're managing your image. You're curating every gesture, every sentence, every silence. You're anticipating how your story will be received before you've even told it. You're never just being, you're being seen, even when you're alone, especially when you're alone, and the strangest part, no one else knows. No one sees the watcher in you, but they have their own inner audience, their own split perception, their own performance. Everyone you meet is doing the same thing, living their lives while also watching themselves live it, and none of us talk about it. We just pretend it's normal, natural, healthy, but is it? Can you really be whole when part of you is always standing in judgment of the rest? Can you feel joy without commentary? Can you feel pain without measurement? Can you feel love without the watcher whispering, don't get too attached? The watcher is the part of you that's always slightly distant, slightly removed. It doesn't feel, it assesses, it doesn't live, it records, and we mistake it for wisdom, for maturity, for mindfulness. But awareness without compassion is surveillance. And the watcher rarely has compassion. It just watches and judges and remembers every misstep, every failure, every moment of awkwardness. It plays them back, rewinds loops, reminds you again and again of where you fell short, and you let it because it sounds like truth. It feels objective, honest, necessary. But here's the catch, it's not. The watcher is not neutral. It's shaped by fear, by trauma, by experience. It doesn't just observe, it filters, distorts. It looks for danger, for rejection, for failure, and it finds it even when it's not there, especially when it's not there. It whispers, you're not doing enough. They're judging you, you're too much, you're not enough, and the paradox deepens, because the more you listen, the more power it has, but the more power it has, the less you trust yourself. And the less you trust yourself, the more you rely on the watcher to guide you. It becomes your compass, your critic, your God. You ask it for guidance, for validation, for safety. And it always answers, but never with kindness, just control. It keeps you small, polished, tense. It teaches you how to survive, but not how to live. It tells you how to avoid shame, but not how to feel free. And freedom is what's missing. The freedom to be in a moment without wondering how it looks from the outside. The freedom to feel without analyzing. The freedom to fail without a mental play-by-play. You think, I need the watcher, it keeps me accountable. But at what cost? Your spontaneity, your peace, your sands. Of wholeness, because if every moment is interrupted by commentary, then you're never really in the moment. You're beside it, near it, around it, but never inside it. And maybe that's why everything feels slightly unreal, slightly distant, like you're watching your life through glass. You're there but not quite, alive but not fully, present but not embodied, because the watcher doesn't let you land. It keeps you floating, trapped between experience and evaluation. And the final twist of the paradox is this: you created the watcher. It's not a foreign entity. It's not an invader. It's you. A version of you built for survival, for protection, for performance, and now it won't leave. But maybe it doesn't have to. Maybe it's not about killing the watcher. Maybe it's about changing its role. From critic to companion, from judge to witness, from threat detector to curious observer. Maybe you teach it compassion. Maybe you soften its gaze. Maybe you say, I see you. I hear you, but I don't have to believe everything you say. And maybe in that space something shifts. The watcher becomes quieter, gentler, less insistent, and you step forward fully, finally, into the life you were meant to live, not observed, not performed, but felt. And if you've been the watcher your whole life, standing in the wings while your moments passed you by, maybe it's time to ask, who would you be if you stopped watching and started living? The paradox of the missing self is what happens when you look inside yourself expecting to find something solid, something central, something permanent, and discover that there's nothing there. You sit in a quiet room, you close your eyes, you ask the question, who am I? Not your name, not your job, not your body, not the roles you play, strip it all away. What's left? The question echoes, and you wait for the answer, but it doesn't come. You try again, who am I? You search through your thoughts, your memories, your emotions, but all you find are things that change. Things that move, things that pass, your opinions shift, your feelings rise and fall, your ideas evolve, your preferences, your fears, your sense of humor, none of it stays the same, so how can any of it be you? You dig deeper, you think maybe on my memories, but memories fade, they blur, they twist with time. Two people remember the same moment in completely different ways. And even your own memories, especially your own memories, aren't reliable. You've forgotten more than you remember. And some of what you do remember never even happened. So if you're not your memories, then what are you? Maybe you're your thoughts, but thoughts come and go. You don't control them. They appear on their own like bubbles rising in a pot of boiling water. Some are helpful, some are hurtful, some don't make any sense. And just because a thought passes through your mind, that doesn't mean it belongs to you. It doesn't mean it defines you. So if you're not your thoughts, then maybe you're your emotions. But emotions are like weather. They change without warning. Joy becomes fear. Love becomes anger. You feel one thing one moment and the opposite the next. Emotions move through you, but they're not you. They can't be the core, so maybe you're your body, but your body changes too. Your cells replace themselves. Your skin wrinkles. Your voice deepens. Your face changes with time. If you lined up photos of yourself from birth to now, you'd see dozens of different people, all sharing your name, all supposedly you. But none of them really are. They're versions, phases, snapshots. So what stays? What's the constant? What's the eye that ties all these shifting parts together? You look for it, you focus, you try to find the self, but it's slippery. You try to locate it, maybe it's in the head, behind the eyes, somewhere in the chest, but it's not. You can't find it anywhere. All you find is awareness, watching, listening, experiencing, but without shape, without substance. You are aware of thoughts, but you are not the thoughts. You are aware of emotions, but you are not the emotions. You are aware of your body, but you are not the body. You're the witness, the observer, the space where all this happens. But that's not a person, that's not an identity. That's not something you can put on a resume or write in a bio. That's just presence, stillness. And here's the paradox. You've spent your entire life thinking there's a self in the center of your being. A captain behind the wheel, a storyteller weaving the thread. But when you go looking for them, they're gone, not hiding, just never there to begin with. You've built your entire life on something that doesn't exist. You've made plans, taken risks, loved deeply, hated fiercely, all based on the idea that you were at the center. But if there's no you, what does any of it mean? What does it mean to say I'm proud of myself, or I forgive myself, or I want to change myself if there's no self to speak of? And yet something's here. Something is reading these words, something is thinking these thoughts, so what is it? Maybe the self isn't a thing, maybe it's a process, an activity, not a noun but a verb. Maybe you are a dance, a flame, a ripple in a pond, constantly changing, never fixed, always becoming. And maybe the illusion of a solid self is necessary. Maybe it helps us function, helps us commit, helps us connect, but it's still an illusion, a beautiful one, a useful one, but a lie nonetheless. And when you see through it, everything changes. You stop trying to find yourself. Because there's nothing to find, you stop trying to define yourself. Because definitions don't hold. You stop clinging to an identity that's always dissolving in your hands, and you begin to live differently, freer, softer. Less obsessed with who you are and more curious about what you're becoming. You become less afraid of change, because change doesn't threaten the self. Change is the self. You become less judgmental. Because without a fixed self to defend, there's no need to be right all the time. There's just experience, learning, motion, and that's the liberation at the heart of the paradox. The self is missing, but in its absence you find something else, peace, openness, possibility. You're not a thing, you're not a role. You're not even a person in the way you thought you were. You are a process of becoming, a cloud forming and dissolving, a wave rising and falling, a moment, then another, then another. And maybe that's not something to fear, maybe that's something to celebrate. Because if there's no fixed self, then there's no fixed failure, no fixed past, no fixed story, just this breath, this step, this now. And if you've spent your whole life trying to find yourself, maybe the reason you never could is because you were never meant to be found, only lived. The last thought before sleep paradox is what happens when you realize you vanish every night without ever witnessing the moment it happens. You lie down, the lights are off. The room cools, the day starts to loosen its grip. You pull a blanket up, adjust your head on the pillow and wait. Your body settles first, breath slows, limbs grow heavier, you close your eyes, and then your mind starts to drift. Thoughts show up uninvited, not sharp, not urgent, just fragments, replays of things you said. Imagine versions of what you should have said, worries dressed up as logic, songs you didn't choose, faces from years ago, your mind trying to hold on, but something's changing, you can feel it. The thoughts get weirder, less linear, less sensible. You think about a door opening into a river and somehow that makes perfect sense. You hear a word you've never heard before and it feels familiar. Then comes the moment, but you don't know it's happening. The final thought, the last spark before you dissolve. The edge of consciousness, you don't notice it because by the time you try, it's already behind you. It's gone, and so are you. That's the paradox. You live every day with a mind that runs nonstop, a voice that won't quiet, a consciousness that holds everything you know, and yet every night that mind disappears, and you never get to say goodbye. There's no fade out, no curtain call, just a vanishing act. You don't fall asleep. You disappear into sleep. There's no memory of crossing over. Just memory, then gap, then waking. It's not like closing your eyes. It's not like walking through a door. It's like being erased line by line until there's nothing left to notice the erasing. And when you return, it's hours later. You come back confused, a little slower, a little strange. You pick up where you left off without questioning what happened in between. But what did happen? Where were you? You don't know, because the you who could ask that question wasn't there. The body was. The heart kept beating. The lungs kept pulling in air. But the thinker, the feeler, the voice inside your head, silent, absent, gone. People say sleep is rest, but it's more than that. It's a ritual disappearance. A nightly surrender. You lie down knowing you'll be gone soon, and you trust that you'll come back, that your body will still be here, that your life will still be waiting, but you never really know, and still you do it, every night, without panic, without fear, as if you've done it 1,000 times, and you have. You just don't remember any of them, and that raises the question, how do you know you're the same person when you wake up? How do you know the one who opened their eyes this morning is the same self who closed them last night? You assume continuity, you trust memory, but sleep doesn't guarantee identity, it guarantees reset, reboot. Some mornings you wake up feeling off, different, disconnected, not quite yourself, and maybe that's not just mood, maybe it's the price of vanishing. Because what is the self if not a thread of awareness, and sleep cuts that thread clean, every night. So where does the thread go? Where do you go? Dreams offer a glimpse, but they don't explain it. In dreams, logic breaks, time bends, you become other people, visit places that don't exist, accept the impossible without question, and it all feels real until it doesn't. Then you wake up, and it's gone, a world lived through, forgotten in minutes. Your dream self vanishes too. That person, the one who ran, flew, cried, kissed, died, doesn't get to exist anymore. They don't wake up with you, you do, the one reading this now. The one who doesn't remember how you got from brushing your teeth to this moment of being awake. But what happened in between, who lived those dreams, who saw those images, who screamed in that falling nightmare, you did, but not this version of you, another, a shadow, a sleep self. And the version of you right now has no idea how to find them again. Because that self disappeared with the last thought before sleep, the one you never get to keep. Some people try to catch it, they train themselves to hover at the edge, to hold awareness just long enough to see the moment happen, but it never works for long. Consciousness is slippery. The moment you try to grab it, it dissolves. You don't notice sleep coming, you notice it once it's gone. You notice the absence only by the return, like walking into a room and realizing something's missing, but you can't say what. You only know it was there, and now it's not. The last thought is like that. It exists, but only in theory, only in concept, never in memory, and that makes it terrifying, because it's the only part of your life you never get to witness. The only moment that always escapes you, the moment when you ends and something else begins, and we call that normal, we call it healthy. But what other experience do we accept without question, even though it includes full loss of self? And what does that say about how much we understand the thing we think we are? We spend our days trying to build identity, trying to discover who we are, trying to control the narrative of our lives. But every night, without fail, we hand it all over, to silence, to darkness, to the unknown. And the last thing we think before that happens is the one thing we never remember. So what if that final thought is the truest one? What if it's the version of you that isn't performing? The thought that doesn't try to impress, to explain, to prove anything. Just a quiet truth whispered to no one. What if that's the real you, and you never get to hear it? What if your most honest moment happens in the space between awareness and oblivion, and you miss it every time? What if your life has been shaped more by the things you don't remember than by the ones you do? What if the core of who you are isn't in your conscious story, but in the silent fall you take each night, a fall you've never seen? A moment you've never lived, a breath you've never known you took. And if that's true, if every night you vanish and return without noticing, then maybe the scariest part of life isn't death. Maybe it's the fact that we already disappear every night and still pretend we're solid, still pretend we're the same person, uninterrupted, still pretend we were ever fully awake to begin with. Frame rate of consciousness paradox is what happens when you realize your experience of reality isn't continuous. It's stitched together like a film reel, one frame at a time with no one watching in between. You wake up, you sit up in bed, you yawn, you stretch, you walk to the kitchen. Everything feels smooth, seamless, uninterrupted. A stream of awareness, a flowing sense of self moving through time. But is it? You reach for your coffee and suddenly you don't remember getting from the bed to the mug. You drive for 20 minutes and realize you can't recall a single turn. You're reading a book and then 5 pages later you have no idea what you just read. Moments drop out, not all at once, not dramatically, just gone. You were here, then not, then here again, and you don't question it. Because your mind is good at filling in the blanks, that's what it does. It tells stories between the stills. It stitches perception into something that feels fluid. But what if that's just a trick? What if consciousness isn't a river but a flipbook, flickering images shown just fast enough to give the illusion of motion? Science calls it discrete perception. Your brain processes the world in pulses, not as a constant stream but as snapshots taken dozens of times per second. Each frame is a construction, a guess. Your eyes dart in micro-movements called saccades. Your brain fills the visual gaps. You don't see your own eye jumps because your brain edits them out, smooths the footage, adds transitions. It's not presenting reality. It's curating it, like a director working in real time, like an editor you never hired. So the paradox is this: you believe you're living moment to moment, but you're not. You're living moment, pause, and your brain hides the pauses. You are not conscious all the time, you're only conscious in bursts. Awareness is not a floodlight, it's a strobe, but the illusion is strong. You feel like you're always you, like your sense of self is a constant hum in the background. But every moment of that self is a constructed echo of the previous moment, a memory pretending to be presence. And sometimes the frame rate drops. You say, that hour just flew by, or I lost track of time. What you're really saying is, I lost track of my frames. Your awareness blinked, your mind skipped, and you didn't notice. Because noticing would require being aware of what happens when you're not aware, and that's impossible. You can't feel the absence of feeling. You can't remember the gap if memory wasn't active inside it. So your brain does the next best thing. It fills the space with stories. I must have been distracted. I was on autopilot. I was just tired. These are not explanations, they are placeholders for something you cannot perceive, the space between frames, and what's in that space? Nothing or something else. If you only exist in frames of awareness, what exists between those frames? Who lives in the pauses? Or what guides you when you're not there to steer? The more you think about it, the more unsettling it becomes. You assume that consciousness is a flashlight where you shine your attention is what becomes real. But what if it's more like a camera trap, taking photos at random intervals, leaving you blind in between? You assume you're continuous, but you're not. Continuity is a mental edit, your brain's greatest trick. The more you analyze your experience, the more you realize how little of it you actually experience. You miss most of your own life, and not because you're distracted, but because the lights simply go out. Briefly, repeatedly, constantly. Imagine watching a movie with one frame removed every second. You wouldn't notice, you'd still follow the plot, but you'd miss key details, glances, gestures, clues. That's your life. You're watching your story on a screen that blacks out frame by frame and convinces you nothing happened. But things do happen in those gaps. Reflexes fire, emotions rise, instincts guide you. You respond to things before you register them. You swerve before you see the car. You smile before you know you're happy. You freeze before the danger is clear. Something is acting in the gaps. Something is living between the frames. But it's not you, or at least not the you that can describe it. So who is it? Is it unconscious processes, the body, some deeper layer of mind? Or is it just emptiness, space where you doesn't exist? And if you don't exist in the gaps, how often are you truly here? What percentage of your day are you actually alive in? You think of sleep as the absence of self. But what if the self flickers out all day long and you just don't notice? What if the you reading this sentence is not the same you who started the paragraph? What if the only thing holding the illusion of you together is memory, and memory is just one more frame in the reel? You say, I am me. But which me? The one in this frame, or the one in the... Next, the paradox deepens. The self feels continuous but is. The mind feels unified but is. The moment feels solid but isn't, and knowing that, truly knowing it, shakes something loose. If you aren't continuous, then nothing you've ever called I is stable. Your preferences, your personality, your goals, your identity, all just momentary snapshots, edited, cropped, filtered. You're a slideshow in fast motion pretending to be a movie. And still you live, still you love, still you hope. Still you dream. Maybe the illusion is good enough. Maybe it doesn't matter that you're flickering because you feel whole. Maybe that's the beauty, that 1,000 disconnected frames can still tell a story that moves you to tears. Maybe the miracle isn't that you're continuous. Maybe the miracle is that you believe you are. But ask yourself this: if the projector ever slows down and the flicker becomes visible, what will you see in the gaps? And what if the real you lives not in the frames, but in the space between? The delayed choice quantum eraser is what happens when the future rewrites the past, and reality waits to decide what happened until after it's already over. Imagine a single particle, a photon. You send it through a double slit, a basic quantum experiment. If you measure which slit it goes through, it behaves like a particle, a dot, a single choice, one path. But if you don't measure it, it behaves like a wave, interference pattern, both paths at once, possibility, duality. This is already strange, the idea that the act of observing changes the outcome. But the delayed choice version takes it further, uncomfortably further. In this version, you don't decide whether or not to measure the path until after the particle has already passed through the slits, after it has done its part, after it has made its decision. The choice to observe or not observe happens after the event, and still the outcome changes. The past rewrites itself based on what you choose to do in the future. If you decide to measure which path the photon took, then the interference pattern disappears, as if it only ever went through one slit. But if you choose not to measure, the interference reappears, as if it went through both, as if it waited to see what you would do, as if reality held its breath. The photon doesn't care when you measure it. It behaves now based on what you haven't done yet. The implication: the future affects the past. The effect determines the cause. And that breaks everything we think we know about time, about order, about logic. We assume the past is fixed, that once something happens, it's over, done, decided. But this experiment suggests otherwise. It suggests that events don't become real until they're observed, that existence doesn't solidify until we look, that particle's reality itself can hover in a state of maybe until the moment we decide to care. And it's not just theory, it's not sci-fi, it's been tested, repeated. Observed, a particle travels one path or both, or neither, until the future reaches back and tells it what it was supposed to be. And that's where the paradox really begins, because we don't experience life this way. We experience time as a line, straight, forward. The past leads to the present, leads to the future. But what if that's just our perception? What if time isn't a line? What if it's a loop, a network? A system of interrelated decisions, bending and folding over one another like a story being rewritten as it's told. What if the past is only the present from another angle? What if cause and effect aren't opposites but twins, locked in an infinite dance where each shapes the other? Think about it. How many times have you looked back and seen something differently, not because the event changed, but because you did? A memory once painful becomes meaningful. A conversation once forgettable becomes defining. A choice you thought was trivial becomes the turning point. Your future self reinterprets your past, and that reinterpretation feels real, true, more accurate than what you thought at the time. But is that just psychology, or is it something deeper? Is your consciousness rewriting your timeline, not metaphorically, literally? Is the act of remembering a form of recreation? The universe responds to observation, and observation can come after the fact. Then what else can be retroactive? Can love be retroactive? Forgiveness, regret? What if the moment you forgive someone changes the nature of what happened between you, even if they're gone? What if forgiving your past self actually changes who you were, not just how you feel about it? What if the story rewrites itself to match the ending you choose? It sounds impossible, but so does a photon going through two slits at once. And we accept that because the math works, because the data agrees. But emotionally we resist it because we want certainty. We want a past that stays put. We want a world where what's done is done. But the delayed choice quantum eraser whispers, no, it's not done, not yet. It's still forming, still flexible, still waiting for your decision to echo backward through the loop. It means you are never just a passenger. You are a co-author, not just of your future, but of your past. The implications are massive. Reality is not just what happens. Reality is what is observed and when it is observed. And maybe in the same way, identity is not just who you were, but who you decide you were. Maybe memory is less about storage and more about construction. Maybe meaning itself is delayed choice. So what do you do with this? Do you obsess over every decision, knowing it ripples forward and backward? Do you freeze, afraid to misstep and rewrite something precious? Or do you find freedom in it, the freedom to let go, to understand that the story isn't finished even when it seems like it is? That healing can change history, not the facts but the feeling, not the moment but the meaning, that it's never too late, not in the Unopened world, not in the emotional world, not in the internal universe you carry. So the next time you remember something painful, ask yourself, am I remembering what happened or am I choosing how to see it now? And if the universe really does wait for you to look before it becomes real, what reality are you looking at? What past are you choosing to observe? And more importantly, what future are you allowing to reach back and rewrite everything you thought you knew? The I know that I don't know paradox is what happens when admitting your ignorance becomes a strange form of knowledge, and you realize that claiming to know nothing still requires knowing something. It starts with a statement, simple, elegant, familiar. I know that I don't know. Socrates made it famous. Philosophers repeated it. Wisdom distilled into 7 words. It sounds humble, it sounds wise, it sounds safe, but say it slowly and it unravels. You claim to know that you don't know. But if you know you don't know, then you know something. And if you know something, then how can you say you do know? You're caught, trapped in a loop. The statement eats itself, a mental Ouroboros, a sentence that cancels its own meaning by declaring it. And yet it feels true, it feels honest, it feels like something worth saying. Why? Because deep down you recognize the gap between what you think you know and what you actually understand. You feel the limit, you touch the edge. And something about naming that edge feels powerful. But here's the paradox. The moment you say, I don't know, you've stepped outside the unknown. You've mapped the border, you've taken a position. You've claimed a kind of superiority over others who still think they know. You've made your ignorance into a credential, and that changes everything. Because now you're not just unaware, you're aware of your unawareness. And that awareness becomes a kind of knowing. So which is it? Are you wise for admitting you know nothing? Or are you trapped in a contradiction, using knowledge to disprove knowledge? The paradox gets deeper. Try applying it to yourself. Do you know who you are? Maybe not. You say, I don't know myself. But you said it. You made a judgment. That means you must have some perspective, some framework, some observation from which to declare your own uncertainty. You can't fully not know and still say you do know. Because that sentence requires a speaker, a sense of self, a position from which to speak. So even in the act of surrendering knowledge, you affirm something. And that something, whatever it is, undoes the purity of the ignorance. It's not blankness, it's curated confusion. Philosophers love this paradox because it pokes holes in every intellectual structure. The moment you try to define what you don't know, you begin to build scaffolding. You create a frame around your ignorance, and that frame is knowledge. Even your confusion becomes categorized. You say, I don't know the answer to that. But you do know the question, you know the shape of the problem, you know enough to name the space where your knowledge ends. And in that way, your ignorance isn't pure, it's shaped, sculpted, aware. Think about it in terms of life. You might say, I don't know what I want. But you do know you're unsatisfied. You do know that something's missing. You do know that your current path isn't working. And that knowing is something, maybe even everything, because it's enough to take a step. And that step, paradoxically, comes from the very thing you claimed you didn't have. So maybe I don't know isn't the absence of knowledge, it's the beginning of it. Maybe it's the first thread you pull before the whole illusion of certainty unravels, but still, the paradox holds. Because if you fully know that you don't know, then you've made a claim, you've drawn a line, you've put a stake in the ground. And if you don't know that you don't know, then you're not really ignorant, you're just unaware. And unawareness doesn't know to question itself. It just floats, it accepts, it shrugs. But the person who says, I know that I don't know, is doing something different. They're placing themselves above ignorance while still claiming to be inside it. They're using knowledge to highlight the limits of knowledge, and that contradiction can't hold, not logically, not completely, but maybe that's the point. Maybe the statement is meant to break itself, like a koan, like a mirror reflecting itself into infinity. Not to give an answer, but to show the impossibility of the question, because we want to believe we can be objective. We want to believe we can measure our ignorance. But the act of measuring changes the thing being measured. The act of thinking changes the thinker. You say, I know I'm lost, but being lost means you don't know where you are. So how can you be sure you can't? Not fully. You can only guess, feel, intuit. And that's not knowing, that's dancing around the edge of it. This paradox touches everything. Science, spirituality, relationships. You think you know someone until you don't. You think you understand love until it hurts. You think you figured yourself out until the mirror cracks. And in every moment of realization, you find yourself saying it again, I don't know. But the voice saying it, that voice, it feels real. It feels solid. So what is it? Is it the self beyond knowledge, the awareness beneath the words, the core that watch? Dance without joining it, or is that just another illusion, another mask pretending to be wisdom? Because if the voice knows that it doesn't know, then it knows. And if it knows, then the loop continues. Forever. Maybe that's why this paradox matters, not because it gives an answer, but because it exposes the structure. It shows you the cracks in your foundation, the lie behind the certainty. And in doing so, it opens space to grow, to listen, to change, because certainty doesn't grow, it locks. It defends, it narrows, but I don't know, opens, it softens, it invites. It doesn't end the conversation, it begins it. And maybe in a world addicted to being right, the most dangerous thing you can say is, I might be wrong, not to be clever, not to appear humble, but because you mean it, because you feel it in your bones, because you know that the more you learn, the more the edges of what you don't know expand, like standing on the shore of an infinite ocean. And still, knowing this doesn't mean you stop learning. It means you keep going, eyes wide, mind open, not because you're ignorant, but because you're free. And if the only thing you truly know is that you don't know, maybe that's not a weakness. Maybe that's the beginning of wisdom, or maybe, just maybe, it's the perfect illusion that keeps us from ever knowing anything at all. The paradox of silence is what happens when the thing we think is empty. The thing we chase for peace turns out to be full of noise, full of truth, full of things we weren't ready to hear. You're alone, no phone, no music, no background chatter, just you. The world is quiet, or at least that's what you thought you wanted. A moment to breathe, a break from the chaos, a chance to escape the noise. But then something strange happens. You start to hear things, not sounds, thoughts, feelings, echoes. The voice in your head turns up its volume. It speaks without permission. It reminds you of that thing you said 5 years ago. It replays your mistakes in high definition. It starts asking questions you've been avoiding. Why are you really doing what you're doing? Are you happy? What happens if none of this works? And just like that, the silence is gone, not broken, not filled, transformed. Because silence isn't the absence of sound. It's the presence of everything you've been trying not to hear. That's the paradox. You think silence is peace, stillness, clarity. But the second you find it, it turns into a mirror, one that reflects everything you've buried. Silence doesn't stay empty, it gets filled with your unfinished business, your unspoken grief, your suppressed emotions, your unmet needs. It becomes loud in a different way, not external volume but internal pressure, the kind that builds slowly, quietly, until you feel like you need to break it, say something, do something. Turn on the TV, open an app, text someone, anything to escape the weight of your own mind. Because silence has a gravity, it pulls things out of you, things you didn't ask to confront, but the confrontation isn't the problem. The problem is that we expect silence to be comfortable. We treat it like a spa, a sanctuary, but it's not, at least not at first. Silence is a detox, and detox hurts. It pulls out the toxins, the chaos, the lies, and that process feels like drowning. Not because silence is evil, but because we've been running from it for so long, we forgot how to breathe without noise. We've learned to use sound as a buffer, music when we're sad, podcasts when we're bored, noise to make the day move faster, noise to keep the anxiety just far enough away. We say we want peace, but we medicate every second of discomfort with distraction. Silence is the thing we claim to crave but fear to face, because facing it means facing ourselves, and not the curated version. Not the confident public version. The real one, the raw one, the one who still hasn't healed, the one who's confused, the one who's scared, and there's no applause in silence, no feedback, no likes, just you asking, is this it? And that question echoes over and over until it becomes another kind of noise, existential static. But here's where the paradox sharpens. Silence doesn't hurt because it's empty. It hurts because it's honest. It doesn't lie, it doesn't flatter. It doesn't distract, it just shows. It shows the truth underneath the noise, and the truth isn't always pretty. Sometimes it's disappointing, sometimes it's terrifying, sometimes it's just quiet, and we don't know what to do with that. We want sound to tell us who we are, we want music to lift us, words to affirm us, voices to guide us, but silence offers none of that, it waits. And in that waiting we meet ourselves, not the story, not the brand, not the armor, just the self, alone. And it's in that moment, in that unbearable stillness, that something shifts. If you stay long enough, if you let the silence speak, you start to hear something else. Not the noise of fear, not the critic, not the doubt, something softer, something deeper, something true, a voice beneath the voice. The one that doesn't need volume, the one that knows who you are. It was buried under deadlines, under conversations, under performance, but it was always there, and silence is the only place it can live. That's the paradox. The thing we run from is the only thing that can guide us home. We fill our lives with sound so we don't have to feel, but feeling is how we heal. We flood our days with noise so we don't have to listen. But listening is how we find what matters. Silence hurts because it reveals. But that pain, that discomfort, that restlessness, it's the beginning of clarity, of alignment, of presence. But only if you stay, only if you resist the urge to fill the space. Only if you sit in the quiet long enough for the real conversation to begin. And that conversation doesn't sound like words, it sounds like stillness, like knowing, like a deep, unmoving presence saying, "You're here, finally." So next time you crave silence, remember, it won't feel like peace at first, it will feel like chaos. But that chaos isn't punishment, it's the clearing of a path back to yourself. And if silence is what you fear, maybe that's exactly where you need to go. Because if the only thing keeping you from yourself is noise, what hap? When the noise finally stops. The book that writes itself is what happens when something is created with no creator, when the source of a thing is lost inside the thing itself, and you realize that what you're living might be a story that's writing you. Imagine a book, heavy, thick, old, you find it in an attic, dust-covered, no title, no author, no publisher, you open it, the pages are blank. But then as you begin to turn them, words start to appear, not printed, not typed, written, in your handwriting. You flip through and the words are your thoughts, your memories, your fears. You read a conversation you had this morning. You read a dream you haven't told anyone about. You read the things you almost said but didn't. You read secrets you've forgotten and ones you never knew you were keeping. It's all there, line by line, page after page. It doesn't stop. You turn the pages and it keeps writing. About your life, about your choices, about your regrets. And you realize something impossible. The book is still writing right now in real time. You say something out loud and there it is on the page, word for word. You think something and there it is recorded. It's like the book is reading your mind faster than you can think it. You try to find the first page, the beginning, but it's blank. You try to find the end, also blank. There's no first word, no final sentence, just a loop. You keep flipping, hoping to catch up to see where the book ends, to figure out who wrote it. But every time you think you've reached the final page, there's another, and another, and another. And here's where the paradox begins. The book is about you, but you're not writing it, you're just reading it. And everything you read you seem to become. You read that you feel anxious, and suddenly you do. You read that you want something, and now you crave it. You read a memory, and it returns to you with emotion that feels fresh, raw, real. You're not controlling the book is controlling you. Or maybe there's no control at all. Maybe it's a loop. You live, the book writes, or the book writes and you live. It's unclear which comes first. You ask yourself, did I think this? Or did the book think it for me? Am I remembering, or am I being told what to remember? Did I choose to do this? Or did the story make the choice and hand it to me dressed up as free will? You search the margins for clues. You flip the book upside down. You scream into it. You write something yourself, your own sentence, your own thought, your own interruption. And for a moment the book pauses. You feel a strange power. Maybe you can change the narrative. Maybe you can write your own ending. But then the book keeps going, it absorbs your sentence, twists it, folds it into the story. As if it had always been part of the plot. You realize that even your resistance was part of the script. Even your rebellion was written in advance. You're not outside the book, you're inside it, and that terrifies you. Because if the book writes itself, if the story creates the storyteller, then where are you in this equation? What are you? A character, a metaphor, an echo? Are you just a voice speaking lines you didn't write? And if so, who or what is the real author? You think maybe it's fate, maybe it's God. Maybe it's your subconscious, but those are just names, labels you stick onto something you don't understand. You want to know why the book exists, why it knows you, why it keeps going. But every answer it gives just leads to another question. Every truth feels like a setup for the next twist. You think about every moment in your life that felt scripted, every coincidence that was too perfect, every conversation that felt rehearsed, every dream that foreshadowed reality. You start to wonder, what if the book isn't just about you? What if the book is you, not a story of your life but the structure of your consciousness, the architecture of your identity, a recursive loop of awareness writing itself into being over and over again, a thought that thinks itself, a sentence that breathes, and if that's true, then nothing you do is outside the book. Every choice you make, every person you meet, every word you speak, it's all part of the unfolding narrative. But here's the real twist. The book doesn't end, it doesn't climax, it doesn't resolve, it just continues. Every day a new page, every moment a new sentence, and there's no way to close it, no way to put it down. You're trapped, or maybe you're home. Maybe the book isn't your prison, maybe it's your body, your mind, your spirit. Maybe it's the only place you've ever truly existed. And the fact that it writes itself is not the threat, it's the miracle. Because if the book writes itself, then it means it's alive. And if it's alive, then maybe you are too, not because you're in control, not because you know the ending, but because you are the unfolding, the sentence being written, the ink that never dries. So now the question changes. It's no longer who's writing this, it's what do I do with the page I've been given? Because if the book is writing itself through you, then maybe your job isn't to finish it. Maybe your job is to read it deeply, live it fully, and wonder if the book is still being written, then what kind of story do you want it to become? And if you're not the author, can you still be the hero? Or are you just a character who thinks he's free in a book that never needed a writer to begin with? The attention paradox is what happens when the more you try to pay attention, the less of it you actually have. When the thing you value most becomes the first thing that slips through your fingers, you wake up, your phone is in your hand before you're even fully conscious. You scroll, you swipe, you read a headline, you start a video, you switch to another. You check the time and it's already been 20 minutes. You barely remember what you looked at. You just remember looking. This isn't new. This is normal. You think about being more mindful. You try to slow down. You open a meditation app. You breathe. You close your eyes. You try to focus. But even in the silence, your thoughts scatter. What's for lunch? Did I reply to that message? What if I'm forgetting something important right now? You try harder. And the harder you try, the worse it gets. Your thoughts bounce around like marbles on a tile floor. Your mind feels full, but nothing is staying still. And here's the paradox. Attention is the gateway to your entire life. Without it, nothing matters. But the moment you try to hold onto it too tightly, it slips. It resists being owned. You can't force it. You can't lock it down. You can only offer it, direct it, hope it stays. Attention is the most valuable thing you have, but it's also the most fragile. It's constantly being hijacked, not by force, by design, notifications, news feeds, ads, infinite scroll. Everything is built to catch your eye, to interrupt, to redirect. Not because you're weak. Because you're human, your brain is wired to notice novelty, movement, change, threat, opportunity. The world learned how to mimic those patterns, then turn them into business models. Your attention became a product, a currency, a war zone. Every app, every screen, every headline is fighting for your glance, and you think you're choosing, you think you're in control. But most of the time, your attention is being pulled by something louder, something shinier, something easier. And you let it happen, not because you don't care, because you're tired, because your focus has limits. It's a muscle, not a machine, and it gets depleted fast. But here's what no one tells you. Attention doesn't just determine what you see. It determines who you become. What you give your attention to shapes your thoughts, your beliefs, your desires, your fears. What you focus on becomes your reality. Not metaphorically, literally. If you spend your time looking at anger, you will feel angry. If you spend your time watching fear, you will feel afraid. If you spend your time chasing beauty, you will feel ugly. If you spend your time comparing, you will feel less. That's how attention works. It's not passive, it's active, it's creative. It builds the architecture of your inner world, but you don't protect it like that. You treat it like an open window. You let anything in. And the longer you do that, the harder it becomes to close the blinds, because you don't just lose focus. You lose agency, the power to decide where you are mentally, emotionally, spiritually. You don't realize how distracted you've become until you try to focus. And then it's already too late. Your mind is spinning, your nervous system is fried, your body is present, but your awareness is fragmented, and it starts to show. In your conversations, you can't finish a sentence without zoning out. In your work, you switch tasks every 5 minutes. In your relationships, you're physically there but emotionally distant. You feel disconnected, shallow, not because you don't care, because your attention is too scattered to land anywhere deeply. And the paradox deepens, because now you want to fix it. You want to pay attention, so you try harder. You download focus apps. You make to-do lists. You block distractions. But now your attention is split between managing your attention and actually living. It's like trying to hold water by squeezing your fists. The tighter you grip, the faster it slips. You become obsessed with optimizing, tracking, controlling, and the very act of doing that fragments your focus further. And still, deep down, you crave presence. You crave silence. You crave depth. You want to be in a conversation without checking your phone. You want to read a book and remember what you read. You want to look at someone and truly see them. But your brain has been trained to expect interruption. It gets bored in stillness. It panics in quiet, because attention, once broken enough times, doesn't just bend, it breaks. And rebuilding it isn't about doing more, it's about doing less, not less effort, less input, because attention isn't strengthened by addition, it's strengthened by subtraction, by letting go of noise, by choosing what not to look at, what not to engage with, what not to let in, and that's hard. Because saying no to attention traps means saying no to a culture that profits off your distraction. It means being bored, it means missing out, it means discomfort. But it also means freedom, real freedom. The kind that can sit with a thought long enough for it to bloom, the kind that can listen without waiting to speak, the kind that can feel pain without numbing, the kind that can fall in love not with stimulation but with stillness. And maybe that's what we're afraid of, not that we can't focus, but that if we did, if we really paid attention, we'd have to face everything we've been avoiding, the grief, the loneliness, the truth, but also the joy, the beauty. The simplicity of this moment right here, asking nothing of you except to be seen. So the next time you feel your attention slipping, ask, where is it going, who benefits, and what is it costing you? Because if you've been trained to give your attention away automatically, then maybe the most radical thing you can do is take it back, not to hoard it, but to offer it intentionally, fully, humanly, because in the end, you are where your attention is. And if your attention has been everywhere but here, have you really been living at all? Self-creation paradox is what happens when the thing doing the building turns out to be the thing being built. When the self you think is choosing is actually being constructed by the choices it makes. You tell yourself, I'm figuring out who I am. You try new things, new clothes, new hobbies, you experiment, you try to find what feels like you. You look in the mirror and think, is this me? You talk to someone and wonder, was I being authentic? You feel lost. You feel like a work in progress. And you are, but the progress isn't moving towards something fixed. It's building something that didn't exist before. You're not becoming who you were meant to be, you're inventing who you will have been. And here's the paradox, the you who is trying to create the self is already the result of that creation. You are shaping the thing that's shaping you. You are the artist and the clay, the architect and the blueprint, the author and the character. You act, and those actions become data, feedback, identity. You decide to be confident and you feel more confident. You decide to be kind and you start seeing yourself as kind. You build evidence by behaving and that evidence rewrites the narrator. But that means there's no fixed core, no permanent version of you hiding under the surface, just layers of intention, choice, repetition. You become who you practice being, you sculpt yourself through action. But then who is doing the sculpting? You say, I want to become a better person. But who is the I? Is it the person you are now or the one you're trying to be? You exist in two places, present self, future self, and both are trying to shape each other. You try to live up to your ideal self. But that ideal self was built by your current values, your current wounds, your current imagination. So in trying to reach it, you're chasing something you already defined, but you also evolve, you change. So the version of you who shows up tomorrow might have new ideas about what's worth chasing, new goals, new fears. And then the process starts again. Constant revision, constant rewriting, a loop of self-definition with no beginning and no end. You are the cause and the effect of yourself. You act like someone with purpose and slowly you gain purpose. You pretend to be brave and then you decide to believe something and then find evidence to justify it, not because it was true, but because you made it true, through repetition, through belief, through the force of becoming. And yet deep down you crave authenticity. You want to find the real you, the one underneath the layers, the one who existed before the pretending, before the performance. But what if that version doesn't exist? What if there's no real you behind the mask, just a series of masks that became a face? What if the pretending was never fake, just early drafts, rough sketches of a self you hadn't finished drawing? We say, be yourself, but we never ask, which one? The self who's tired. The self who's curious, the self who wants to change everything, the self who wants to stay safe. You contain all of them, and none of them, because the self is a process, not a product, and processes don't end, they loop, they echo, they recreate. So the more you try to pin yourself down, the more you slip through your own fingers. You can describe yourself, but those descriptions become outdated as soon as you speak them. You say, I'm the kind of person who, but tomorrow you're not exactly. Not fully, and that's not failure, that's growth. but it makes things complicated because you want stability. You want to know who you are, you want a version of yourself you can rely on, but the self doesn't want that. The self wants to evolve, it wants to expand. And sometimes it wants to tear itself apart to see what's underneath. So you fight it, you cling to labels, you say, this is who I am. But those labels become cages. The more you hold on, the less room you have to breathe. Until one day something breaks, a relationship ends, a job falls apart, a belief gets shattered, and suddenly you're forced to rebuild. You start asking questions you thought were already answered. Who am I? What do I want? What do I believe in? And for a while it feels like a crisis, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's the most honest moment you've had in years, because it's not a breakdown, it's a reset. A recognition that the self isn't something you find, it's something you're always making. And if that's true, then maybe the goal isn't to arrive. Maybe the goal is to participate, to show up for the building of your own becoming, to live as an unfolding, a question mark, a sketch in progress. You might never be able to answer who am I completely, but maybe that's not the point. Maybe the better question is, who am I being today? And if you answer that with intention, with compassion, with courage, then maybe the self you're creating right now is exactly the one you were always am. Ain't to become, even if no one, including you, wrote the ending yet. Meno's paradox is what happens when you realize that learning anything, truly learning, should be impossible. Because if you know something, you don't need to learn it. And if you don't know it, how would you even know where to start looking? You sit down to think. You want to understand something, love, death, yourself, the future, something big, something worth knowing. You feel the itch, the pull, the instinct to explore. But the second you begin, you hit a wall. You ask yourself, what am I really trying to figure out? And the question floats in the dark. Undefined, slippery, and you realize you don't even know what you don't know. That's where it begins. Meno's paradox. Plato wrote it down over 2,000 years ago, but it hasn't aged. It still cuts. It still stings. If you already know what you're looking for, then what's the point of searching? You already have it. And if you don't know what you're looking for, how will you recognize it when you find it? How do you search for a word you've never heard? How do you chase a shape you've never seen? The paradox exposes a crack in how we think knowledge works. We imagine discovery as a map, a destination, but this paradox says the moment you set out, you're already lost. You say, I want to find truth. But which truth? How do you know it exists? How do you know it isn't just a reflection of what you've already been taught? You say, I want to understand myself. But how do you know you don't already? How do you know the version of you doing the asking isn't already the answer? You say, I want to know what I believe. But belief is not something you can observe from a distance. The act of believing shapes what's visible. So the closer you get, the less objective you become. It's like trying to look at your own eyeballs without a mirror. You need distance, and the self gives you none. This is why real learning feels so strange, because it's not just about information, it's about transformation. The learner disappears, the question consumes them. You become someone new in the process of discovering what you didn't know you needed, and that transformation makes the paradox worse. Because now you're not just dealing with unknowns, you're dealing with the fact that your pursuit of knowledge keeps changing the one who's pursuing it. You set out to find something, but the you who started is gone, replaced, rewritten. So now what? Do you keep searching, knowing that every answer will become outdated? Every truth provisional, every insight just a step toward a deeper confusion? Or do you stop, accept that ignorance is permanent, that certainty is a myth, that the best you can hope for is a comfortable kind of confusion? Most people choose the second option without realizing it. They live inside safe questions, familiar answers. They build identities around things they no longer question. Not because those things are true, but because it's easier than circling a question that has no door. But if you stay in the paradox long enough, if you don't run, something happens. You stop asking for answers. You start asking better questions, and that's where real learning begins, not in the moment of recognition, but in the moment of surrender. When you realize that what you're trying to find might not have a shape, might not be an object, might not be knowable at all, that's terrifying, but it's also freeing, because now you're not chasing a goal, you're dancing with possibility. You're listening instead of forcing. You're watching how your thoughts shift, how your mind opens, how your assumptions crack. You're not collecting facts, you're expanding the space in which truth could appear. And maybe that's the only way anything ever gets learned, not by hunting it down, but by becoming the kind of person who could recognize it if it showed up. Meno's paradox says you can't search for what you don't know, but what if the search isn't about finding? What if it's about changing? What if the point of learning isn't to reach a conclusion, but to grow into someone who no longer needs one? We say knowledge is power. But maybe not. Maybe knowledge is humility. Maybe knowledge is curiosity stretched out over time. Maybe knowledge is saying, I don't know, I might never know, but I'm still here, asking, listening, letting the question take me somewhere I couldn't have imagined. Maybe that's the answer, not knowing, but being brave enough to keep going anyway. The inverted spectrum problem is what happens when you realize that everything you see might be fundamentally different from what someone else sees, and there's no way to ever prove it. You look at the sky, it's blue, you've always known it as blue. You were taught that word as a child. You pointed at the crayon, someone said blue, and that became truth. But what if the way you see blue isn't the same as the way someone else sees it? What if their blue is your red? What if the color they experience when looking at the ocean is the one you feel when staring at fire? You'd never know, because the word is the same, the label matches. You both say blue, but what you're seeing, what you're feeling could be opposites, perfectly inverted, internally flipped, and that's the problem. Language doesn't describe experience. It maps it, it covers it, it points in the direction of it, but it can't show it. You could spend your whole life talking about colors and never once touch the thing itself. You could describe red as warm, as angry, as passionate, but that's not red. That's metaphor, that's culture, that's shared agreement. But the experience, the raw sensory input, that's locked inside, only yours, private, and completely unverifiable. That's the inverted spectrum. Two people can appear to be having the same experience, but they aren't, and they can never prove it, not even to each other. Especially not to each other. You think, well, maybe science can solve it. We can measure wavelengths, we can track cones and rods and neural pathways, and we do, but science doesn't measure qualia, it doesn't measure the feeling of seeing, it doesn't measure the subjective quality of perception, it doesn't tell you what red feels like to someone else, it just tells you what light is bouncing off their retina, and you assume that means you're the same, but that's an assumption, a comforting one. One that helps you believe that the world is shared, that experience is consistent, that you're not living in a private reality stitched together by your own biology. But maybe you are, maybe everyone is, maybe you'll never truly know what it's like to be another person, and maybe no one will ever truly know what it's like to be you. That sounds lonely, and it is, because this problem doesn't just apply to colors. It applies to pain, to joy, to memory, to fear. You say, I'm sad. Someone else says, I'm sad, but are you feeling the same thing? Or are you both using the same word to describe different kinds of storms? Maybe your sadness is a numb ache and theirs is a sharp stab. Maybe your happiness is a glow and theirs is a fire. You don't know. You can't know because all we have are metaphors, descriptions, gestures toward the feeling, not the feeling itself. And that means the most personal, most intimate parts of being human might be entirely unsharable, entirely solitary. That's the cost of consciousness. You live in a body, a mind, a filter, and no one else gets access to the raw feed. They see the outputs, the words, the actions, the expressions, but not the thing itself. Not the color of your fear, not the shape of your grief, not the flavor of your memories. You're a universe that can't be exported. A painting no one else will ever see, even if they stand next to you your whole life. That's the inverted spectrum, and it gets worse. Because even your own experiences might be unstable. You think your red today is the same as your red tomorrow. But how would you know? Your brain changes, your context shifts, your associations evolve. Red used to mean crayons, then it meant warning signs, then it meant love, then it meant anger, the same color, different lives, different meanings, different sensations, and the language never updates. The label stays the same, so the difference gets hidden, even from yourself. So you start to ask, what else is inverted? What else do we assume is shared but is? Love, time, memory? Is your feeling of 5 minutes the same as mine? Is your nostalgia colored like mine? Or is it a completely different texture hidden behind the same word? And if that's true, if our minds are this isolated, how do we ever connect? How do we ever trust each other? How do we ever love? We do it by pretending, by agreeing. By choosing to believe that the feeling I call this is close enough to the feeling you call this. We sync up our words and hope our hearts follow, and sometimes, miraculously, they do. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to hold hands, enough to share a song, enough to say me too and feel understood. And maybe that's the beauty inside the paradox, that even if we can never be sure what anyone else is experiencing, we still try, we still reach. We still believe that the invisible world inside us might resonate with the invisible world inside someone else, that our private realities might overlap, even just for a second, that our reds might rhyme, and if that's possible, if shared, meaning can bloom in the space between separate minds, then maybe the point isn't to solve the paradox. Maybe the point is to live with it, to honor the mystery, to speak with care, to listen like you'll never fully understand but still want to try. Because if you've spent your whole life calling something blue and someone else has too, and you both smile when you see it, then maybe the color doesn't matter. Maybe the connection does. Maybe it's not about what we see, but about how we choose to see together. Even if our spectrums are inverted, even if the light inside us never matches. The paradox of fictional memories is what happens when your mind gives you moments you never lived, memories of events that never happened, and you believe them anyway. You sit with a friend, they tell a story, something about a trip you both took, a moment that made you laugh until you cried. You nod, you laugh again, you even remember what the sky looked like, what song was playing in the car. But later alone you wonder, did that actually happen? You check old photos, you find the trip. You find the car, but the moment, the joke, the laughter, there's nothing, and your friend doesn't remember it either, not like you do. You start to wonder, where did the memory come from? Why does it feel so real if it is? And if your mind can create something that feels like the truth, how do you know anything else you remember actually happened? That's the paradox. A memory doesn't need to be real to be felt. It doesn't need to be true to shape you. Your brain stores stories, fragments, colors, feelings. And sometimes it stitches them together into something coherent, something meaningful, but not necessarily something accurate. Maybe you saw a movie and later your mind placed you inside the scene. Maybe you dreamed it. Maybe you imagined it 100 times and the repetition made it solid. That's the danger of memory. It doesn't record, it recreates. Every time you remember something, your brain rewrites it, adjusts it, recolors it, adds or subtracts based on who you are now, and sometimes it adds too much. It makes something from nothing, a person, a conversation, a moment of connection, a moment of pain. And it feels exactly like the real ones. It passes the test, emotionally. Physically, your body responds, your heart rate changes, you cry, you laugh, you flinch, because the body doesn't know the difference. The nervous system doesn't ask for evidence, it just reacts. And suddenly, a fictional memory lives inside you the same way a real one does, taking up space, changing your decisions, influencing your identity. But if the feeling is real and the impact is real, does it matter that the memory is? You remember being comforted as a child by someone who wasn't there. You remember a cruel word that was never said. You remember a kiss that never happened, a loss that never occurred, a success that never took place. But the residue is there, the belief, the weight, the change. So now you have to ask what's more real, the event or the memory of it? What's more powerful, what happened or what you believe happened? That's the heart of the paradox. We live by our memories. We use them to make sense of who we are, to choose who to trust, what to pursue, what to avoid. But if those memories can be false, perfectly, vividly, deeply false, then who are we really? Are we the sum of our experiences or the sum of the stories we've chosen to believe? And how do we choose? If someone insists they remember something you don't, are they wrong or are you? If you remember an event no one else does, is it a lie or a truth that only exists in your mind? And what if those private truths matter more than shared facts? What if your version of childhood is a fiction built from emotion, not reality, but it still shaped every decision you've made since? Do you correct it? Do you trust someone else's version over your own? Or do you accept that memory is not about accuracy, it's about identity? Some scientists say all memory is fiction, that we're not recalling the past, we're assembling it, like building a scene in a movie studio, using sets and props and lighting, using mood and music and context. And sometimes the final cut has scenes that never actually happened, but it works, it tells a story, a believable one, one that helps you function, one that helps you survive, and sometimes that's enough. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes fictional memories hurt you, they trap you. You believe someone hated you so you avoid love, you believe you failed so you stop trying, you believe you were always alone so you never reach out, and none of it happened, not like you think. Maybe someone loved you and you forgot, maybe you were brave and you ignored it, maybe you were safe and didn't notice. Your mind recorded a version that made sense at the time, but time changed and the story stayed the same. So how do you fix that? Can you fix it? Can you edit a memory the same way it edited itself into you? Maybe. But you have to start by admitting that you might be wrong, about yourself, about the people you blame, about the story you've used to explain your pain, and that's hard because memory isn't just information, it's loyalty. You feel loyal to your version of events, to the story that gave your suffering meaning, to the narrative that gave your strength context. Letting go of a fictional memory feels like erasing yourself, like betraying who you've become, but maybe the self you became was never real either. Maybe it was built around a false memory that locked you in. And maybe letting go isn't erasure, it's liberation. You get to choose which memories define you, even if you didn't choose them originally, even if your mind played tricks, even if the past is soft, blurred, uncertain, you can still decide what story to carry, what version to live by, what fiction to honor, because every memory is a mix, a remix, a distorted echo, but some echoes serve you, some give you light, some give you peace. And if a fictional memory can break you, then maybe, just maybe, a new one can heal you. So the next time you find yourself clinging to a memory, ask, did this really happen? And even if it didn't, what did it teach me? What did it cost me? What did it become? And if your life has been shaped by moments that never happened, then maybe the only question left is this: what kind of memory do you want to create next? Every action, every idea, every structure must begin somewhere. A blank page awaits the first sentence. A problem awaits its solution. A journey its first step. But in many cases, the difficulty lies not in continuing, but in beginning. One hesitates, not because the task is too complex, but because the direction is unclear. And so the question arises, how does one begin when one does not know how to begin? This is the how to begin paradox, the problem of initiating thought, action, or inquiry without already knowing the path forward. It appears whenever a blank must be filled without a rule, whenever an origin is demanded in the absence of precedent. The paradox is not one of knowledge, but of structure. To begin, one must act. But to act meaningfully, one must already know something about the end. And yet, if the end were known, the beginning would not be needed. The circle tightens. This tension is familiar in creation. A writer sits before a blank page. The cursor blinks. They know that words must come, but not which ones. Every sentence implies a direction, a tone, a world. The first sentence determines what is possible, but how does one choose it before anything has taken form? The paradox is sharper in problem solving. To solve a complex problem, one must approach it with some idea of its structure. But that structure only becomes visible through engagement. If the problem is entirely unfamiliar, then how does one know what strategy to use? One must begin without understanding, but without beginning, understanding does not arise. This is not a contradiction in logic, it is a contradiction in experience. Philosophically, the paradox touches on the nature of initiation. Aristotle spoke of the unmoved mover, the cause that begins all motion without itself being caused. Every system requires an origin, but the origin itself cannot belong to the system. In action, this takes the form of the first move, ungrounded, unanchored. In epistemology, a similar problem appears in the regress of justification. Every belief requires a reason, but every reason is itself a belief. If each justification demands another, then the chain is infinite. To escape, one must posit a foundational belief, one that is known without prior reason. But such a belief is arbitrary unless justified, and so the regress begins again. The how to begin paradox is a local version of this. To begin thinking, one must already have a thought. To begin planning, one must already have a goal. But where does the first fragment come from? In practice, beginnings often emerge from outside. A deadline forces a start, a prompt gives a direction. A conversation sparks an idea, but these are not true beginnings, they are reactions. The paradox concerns the internal origin, when nothing external compels and nothing internal is yet formed. Some traditions offer metaphors. In Zen Buddhism, the beginner's mind is prized, the state of openness before knowing, but even this requires practice. One must learn how to return to unknowing. One must cultivate the ability to begin. The paradox loops again, one must know how not to know. In creative disciplines, starting is often described as instinctive. One moves, marks, tries. The first word may be wrong, the first brushstroke may be painted over, but the act breaks inertia. Momentum begins, the system moves. But even here, choice is implicit. One does not act randomly. The first step is guided by taste, habit, expectation. Behind spontaneity is structure. The unconscious is not formless, it is preformed. This suggests that beginnings are never pure. They are always contaminated by context. One begins with a body, a history, a language. Every act carries traces. The paradox, then, is not that one cannot begin, but that one cannot begin absolutely. There is no first moment, only a moment that seems first, relative to what follows. In logic, this becomes a problem of definitions. Every concept requires other concepts to define it. The dictionary loops endlessly. There is no word that explains itself. In mathematics, axioms are accepted without proof, not because they are certain, but because something must stand still for reasoning to begin. The same is true in life. One commits, one decides, but the reason may come later. The explanation follows the act. One begins and then constructs the justification. The path is retrofitted. And this is the paradox's final twist. Often, we do not truly begin until we are already underway. The mind acts and only afterward recognizes that it has started. The beginning is found in hindsight. The question, how do I begin, is itself a beginning. The doubt, the pause, the search, these are already motion. The self seeks a first step, and by seeking has stepped. Thus, the paradox does not prohibit action. It describes the structure of emergence, how something arises from less than itself, how a system generates direction from within, how though Ut begins thinking, how the blank is crossed by the trace of its own refusal. The how to begin paradox remains unsolved, because beginning is never seen directly. It has no shape, no location. One finds oneself already beyond it. You started before you knew. The beginning has already begun. A person enters a room lined with mirrors. Every wall reflects every other. Their image is repeated endlessly, a corridor of selves fading into distance. As they move, so do their reflections. Each copy mimics the original with precision, turning, pausing, blinking in perfect synchronization. The person reaches out and 100 hands reach back, but none of them are real, none of them are reachable. This is the mirror maze, a space of perfect visibility and absolute disorientation. The paradox lies not in the mirrors themselves, but in the structure they create, every image visible but none accessible, every path seemingly open but none leading out. The mirror maze is more than an architectural illusion. It is a metaphor for self-reflection, self-reference, and recursion. It is a model of how systems, thoughts, and identities fold back upon themselves, producing visibility without clarity, complexity without ground. The paradox begins with the nature of mirrors. A mirror shows what is in front of it. It reflects appearance, not substance. It produces images, not presence. But when mirrors reflect mirrors, the reflection gains depth. It creates the illusion of infinity. Each image contains another, and another, and another, without ever arriving at the original. In mathematics, this resembles recursion, a function that calls itself. Recursion can be powerful, allowing elegant solutions, compressed representation, but it also contains risk, infinite regress, stack overflow, collapse. If a process cannot bottom out, it cannot resolve. The mirror maze paradox is a form of conceptual recursion applied to selfhood. The self reflects on the self, which reflects on that reflection, and so on. Identity becomes layered, each layer commenting on the last, but the original, the unreflected self, remains hidden. This recursive loop appears in introspection. One asks, what am I thinking? Then, why am I thinking that? Then, why do I care about why I'm thinking that? Each layer of questioning produces another. The mind folds inward, but no final answer appears. Each level contains only another reflection. The paradox lies in this visibility. Each image seems complete, each thought appears clear, but the system as a whole lacks foundation. There is no anchor point. Every level defers to another. The self is mirrored endlessly, but nowhere found. Philosophy has long wrestled with this problem. In Descartes' Meditations, the thinker doubts everything, even the self, until arriving at the thought, I think, therefore I am. But this certainty is built on introspective reflection. The cogito assumes a self capable of observing itself, yet the structure of that observer is left unexamined. In psychoanalysis, the mirror stage represents a crucial moment in development. The infant recognizes its reflection and identifies with it. The image is whole, coherent, unlike the fragmented experience of the body, but this identification is misrecognition. The child takes the external image as the internal self. A lifetime of self-modeling begins, grounded not in substance, but in surface. The mirror maze paradox is this structure writ large. One navigates identity through images of the self, memories, judgments, roles. Each is a mirror. Each reflects the person in a slightly different way, but none is the person. The map is not the territory. The reflection is not the source. And yet the reflections matter. One learns from them. One constructs a sense of self through them. One adjusts posture, behavior, emotion. The mirrored feedback becomes a guide. The maze is inhabited. But navigation is treacherous. In a mirror maze, every path seems open, every direction looks valid, but most are false repetitions of the same. Movement becomes disorientation, progress becomes recursion. The same happens in thought. One may reflect endlessly, refining ideas, questioning motives, analyzing patterns, but if no new ground is reached, the process becomes a loop. Insight turns into echo. The thinking becomes about thinking, the reflection about reflection. Depth is replaced by motion. This is not merely a psychological concern. It appears in logic, language, and computation. Self-reference can generate power, as in Gödel's incompleteness theorems, which use self-referential statements to reveal limits in formal systems. But self-reference also generates paradox, as in the liar paradox. This sentence is false. The system collapses under the weight of its own reflection. In systems theory, feedback loops are essential, but ungrounded feedback leads to instability. A mirror maze without exit becomes noise. So what is the resolution? One response is to break the loop, to find a fixed point, a reflection that does not reflect, a base level. But such points are elusive. They may be imposed but not discovered. Every claim to origin risks being another mirror. Another response is to accept the maze, not as failure but as condition. The self is recursive, thought is self-referential. There is no center, only reflections of reflections. Identity is not substance but pattern. The maze does not need an exit. It is a structure to be explored, not escaped. In this view, clarity comes not from breaking the mirrors, but from recognizing their arrangement. One learns to navigate the maze without expecting a final room. One lives within recursion, knowing its shape. The paradox, then, is not resolved, it is reframed. You see yourself, and you see yourself seeing yourself. And you keep moving through images that are not you, but without which you would not know you exist. A person receives a gift. It is wrapped, sealed, unmarked. They hold it in their hands, feel its weight, imagine its contents. They know it was chosen for them. They believe it holds something meaningful. But for reasons unclear even to themselves, they do not open it. They place it on a shelf or in a drawer and let it remain unopened for days, months, or even years. They think about it often. They remember that it is there, but they never look inside. This is the paradox of the unopened gift, the tension between potential and realization, between what is known to exist and what is deliberately kept unknown. The paradox arises when the value of a thing seems to depend on not knowing it. The gift is most alive when it is unopened. Once opened, it becomes ordinary, known, defined, possibly disappointing. The mystery dies. The paradox is not about gifts, literally. It is about the relationship between possibility and knowledge, about the structures in the mind that allow something to be held as valuable precisely because it is withheld from completion. To open the gift is to convert uncertainty into fact, to collapse the way function, so to speak. What was once a multiplicity, an array of imagined possibilities, becomes a single object, and the act is irreversible. Once the gift is opened, the imagined versions cannot return. The box is closed, not by its wrapping, but by its revelation. In this way, the unopened gift becomes a metaphor for many things: unread books, unspoken feelings, undeclared truths. Each contains a kind of suspended meaning, a promise that exists more vividly in imagination than in reality. Their value is potentiated by delay. And this raises the paradox. If the gift is meant to be opened, then why does its meaning feel so rich when it is not? If understanding is the goal, why does the act of not knowing sustain such emotional weight? In epistemology, the issue resembles the tension between curiosity and certainty. The drive to know propels inquiry, but the moment of knowing often disappoints. The question is vivid, the answer is inert, the gift unopened is luminous, the gift opened is ordinary. The paradox also recalls Schrödinger's cat, the thought experiment in which a cat in a box is both alive and dead until observed. The unopened gift, too, contains all its possible contents simultaneously until the seal is broken. Observation forces reality into a single path. Imagination holds all paths at once. This multiplicity is central to the paradox. The mind prefers possibility, not because it is better, but because it is fertile. The unopened gift is a mirror for projection. One imagines what it might be, what it could signify, how it would feel. These fantasies fill the unknown space with meaning, but that meaning is detached from truth. And yet the meaning feels real. So the person leaves the gift unopened, not out of fear, but out of reverence. They preserve the ambiguity, because ambiguity is richer than resolution. The paradox extends to relationships. A conversation not yet had, a letter never sent, a confession withheld. Each is an unopened gift containing the possibility of transformation, but also the risk of collapse. To act is to end the uncertainty. To withhold is to let meaning grow in the dark. This is not always dysfunctional. In some cases, the unopened gift becomes a source of comfort. It symbolizes potential. It provides a sense of having something yet to come, even if it never arrives. But over time, the gift can become heavy. Its presence begins to distort the mind. It becomes charged not with joy, but with tension. Its contents grow in the imagination until they exceed all proportion, and still, the person does not open it. Why? Perhaps because they know, consciously or not, that opening it would end the story, that the object would become an object rather than a symbol, that the mystery would resolve into fact, and fact is finite. In this way, the paradox touches the nature of meaning itself. Some meanings are destroyed by discovery. They exist only in the space between question and answer. Once the answer arrives, the space collapses. The gift unopened is not a failure. It is a condition, a state of suspended possibility, a model of how the mind relates to the unknown. And so the paradox does not demand a resolution. It describes a structure of delay, a decision not to decide, a refusal to collapse possibility into certainty, a reverence for ambiguity. Eventually, the gift may be opened, or it may not. Either way, the meaning has already formed, not in the object but in the space around it, in the waiting, in the wondering, in the knowledge that something is there but not yet known. That space is fragile. Once crossed, it cannot be rebuilt. And so the person leaves it closed. Not out of indifference, but because it matters too much. The gift remains silent, full, unopened. A name is supposed to identify, to pick something out from the world and give it a label, a sound, a symbol, a point of reference. Tree, justice, Maria. With a name, one can speak of something, remember it, pass it to others in conversation. Naming is what makes the world graspable. Without names, there would be no sentences, no categories, no thought as we know it. But some names fail. Some names do not point clearly to a referent. Some refer to things that change, or that cannot be seen, or that do not exist in any coherent way. Some refer to themselves. Some deny what they appear to assert. And so arises a paradox. Names are meant to fix meaning, but the act of naming sometimes obscures what is being named. This is the antinomy of the name, the contradiction between the function of naming as identification and its failure to provide clarity or fixity in certain cases. A name is meant to make something known, but in many situations, the more one uses the name, the less one grasps the thing itself. The problem begins with abstract terms, words like freedom, beauty, truth. These names seem to point to ideas, but what exactly do they indicate? Ask 10 people to define justice, and one receives 10 interpretations. The word is the same, but the referent varies. The name gives the illusion of agreement while masking deep disagreement. In this sense, the name functions not as identification, but as a placeholder, a marker for a concept too large or vague to be held in precise terms. The paradox is that the more powerful the word seems in rhetoric, politics, ethics, the less clearly it refers to anything fixed. The issue becomes sharper in self-reference. What does this sentence refer to in the phrase, "This sentence is false"? The name refers to the sentence, but the sentence includes the name. The referent and the reference fold into each other. The result is a logical loop. If the sentence is true, then it is false. If it is false, then it is true. The name destroys the meaning it attempts to convey. This structure also appears in naming the self. What is meant by I? The word refers to the speaker, but who is the speaker? Over time, the body changes, thoughts change, memory fades. The self is in flux, yet the name remains the same. I refers, but to what? The philosopher Derek Parfit argues that personal identity is not fixed over time. The person who exists now may not meaningfully be the same as the person who existed 10 years ago, and yet the name, the label I, implies continuity. The paradox lies in the disconnect. The name suggests a stable referent where none exists. In religious traditions, the problem is elevated. The name of God, for instance, is often treated as sacred but also paradoxical. In the Hebrew tradition, the name YHWH is unpronounceable. It derives from the verb to be, suggesting a being that is beyond naming. In many mystical texts, the divine is said to be beyond all names. The name points beyond itself, and in doing so, fails as a name. This becomes a general pattern. When something is too complex, too fluid, or too self-referential, the name ceases to serve its usual function. It becomes either too narrow or too broad, too static or too empty. And yet, naming remains unavoidable. One must use language to think, to communicate. One cannot suspend all labels. The paradox is that one must use names even while knowing they cannot always name. In philosophy of language, this problem is addressed through distinctions. Theories separate sense and reference, denotation and connotation, signifier and signified, but the paradox persists. No formal model fully captures the instability of names when they fail. Consider indexicals, words like here, now, this. Their meaning depends entirely on context. Now changes every second. Here shifts with every step. These names seem to name, but only momentarily. They vanish in use. The reference is always moving. Or consider fictional entities. What does the name Sherlock Holmes refer to? There is no person, no historical being, but the name carries meaning. One can describe Holmes, discuss his traits, argue about his choices. The name functions but refers to nothing real. It creates a presence out of absence. The antinomy of the name is most acute when one tries to name the unnameable, when one confronts mystery, ambiguity, or paradox itself. Try to name nothingness, try to name being. The names act like nets thrown at the ocean. They catch something, but not what was intended. And yet without the name, the thing vanishes from discourse. It cannot be thought, it cannot be shared. The name is necessary but insufficient. It is a bridge that does not reach the other side. The paradox, then, is structural. To speak, one must name. To name, one must simplify. To simplify, one must distort. And in distortion, the thing named may be lost. Still, the name is used. Still, one says, lo. Vi truth, God, freedom. Each time the word both reveals and conceals. Each time it points, not to what is, but to what cannot be held. A sentence is spoken in one language, je ne sais quoi. It is translated into another, I don't know what. The grammar aligns. The words correspond, but something feels missing. The English version lacks the nuance, the elegance, the cultural weight. It is technically accurate, and yet it fails. This is the paradox of translation, the problem that arises when meaning is preserved, but something essential is lost. The words align, the structure holds, the logic survives, but the spirit, the texture, the depth do not transfer. Translation aims to carry meaning across boundaries. But sometimes, the very act of translation reveals that meaning is bound to context, to form, to sound, and cannot be carried whole. The paradox lies in the goal of translation itself, to make the unfamiliar familiar, to bring the foreign into one's own terms. But if the meaning is truly foreign, then making it familiar alters it. The more precise the translation, the more one risks distorting what made the original meaningful. This is not just a linguistic problem, it is a philosophical one. What is meaning, if not the sum of context, tone, intention, cultural background, and usage? And if all those are language-dependent, then can meaning ever truly cross the boundary from one system to another? At the heart of the paradox is the assumption of equivalence, that there is a way to say the same thing in a different language, but often there is not. Words are embedded in histories. Sentences are shaped by idioms, allusions, traditions. A phrase in one language may carry centuries of layered meaning, while its counterpart in another feels flat. Consider poetry. A poem translated word for word often loses its rhythm, its rhyme, its resonance. To preserve form, one must alter content. To preserve content, one must abandon form. Every translation becomes a trade-off. The translator becomes not a conduit, but a creator reconstructing, not replicating. The paradox deepens with philosophical texts. A term like logos in ancient Greek resists simple translation. It means word, reason, principle, account, structure all at once. In English, there is no equivalent. Every choice narrows the meaning. To translate logos as word emphasizes speech. To translate it as reason emphasizes thought. The richness is lost. And yet to leave the word untranslated, to import it wholesale, creates new problems. The reader is excluded. The gap remains. The paradox is unavoidable. To bring meaning across, one must change it. But to leave it unchanged, one fails to bring it across. This leads to a broader question. Is meaning independent of language? If ideas exist prior to language, then translation should be possible. The same thought can be clothed in different words. But if ideas are shaped by language, if they are inseparable from the medium in which they arise, then translation is never pure. Every language carves the world differently. Each maps reality in its own way. This is the view of linguistic relativism, that language shapes thought, and that translation is not merely difficult, but structurally constrained. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis suggests that speakers of different languages perceive and categorize the world differently. If true, then translation does not just bridge difference, it crosses incommensurable worlds. Still, translation works. Books are read, films are subtitled, laws are interpreted, commerce flows. How is this possible? Because translation is not about perfect equivalence. It is about approximation, negotiation, compromise. The translator navigates between fidelity and accessibility, between loyalty to the source and clarity to the target. The paradox is managed, not solved. Some embrace this instability. Walter Benjamin, in The Task of the Translator, argued that translation should not aim to replace the original, but to reveal its untranslatability, to expose the limits of meaning, the gaps in language. The translation becomes a commentary, not a copy. Others resist. Machine translation, for instance, treats language as code, input and output, optimized for utility. But even the most advanced systems struggle with ambiguity, tone, irony, cultural reference. A joke in one language dies in another. A proverb becomes nonsense. The paradox also touches on identity. In multilingual speakers, translation occurs internally. One shifts between languages, sometimes within a single thought, but the feeling of self changes. The language speaks differently. One is not the same person in different tongues. Each language carries a different rhythm, a different emotional palette. This suggests that translation is not only between languages, but between selves. The act of translation becomes an act of transformation. To say the same thing in another language is to say a different thing in a different voice. Still, one tries, one explains, interprets, approximates. The paradox does not prevent translation. It makes it meaningful. The gap is not a failure, it is the space where effort occurs. To translate is to acknowledge that perfect transfer is impossible, and then to attempt it anyway. Meaning without equivalence. Understanding through difference. The paradox remains, and yet the conversation continues. Something looks deep, a theory, a person, a belief system. It contains intricate language, layered references, interlocking parts. It gestures toward complexity, toward hidden truths beneath the surface. The more one examines it, the more meanings seem to emerge. The structure appears vast, nuanced, rich. But then at some point something changes. The repetition becomes apparent. The pattern flattens. What once felt deep now feels hollow. The complexity was real, but it led nowhere new. This is the illusion of depth, the paradox in which something appears profound but turns out to be shallow, or alternately, appears simple but contains more than it seems. The contradiction lies not in the object but in the observer's shifting perception. What feels deep might only be layered complexity without substance. What seems trivial might conceal structural significance. The paradox is not about deception, it's about structure. Some things feel deep because they are unfamiliar. Their pattern is unclear, their logic uncertain. But once the structure is grasped, once the algorithm is known, the illusion collapses. The appearance of depth depended on confusion, not on content. This occurs in language. A vague sentence can sound meaningful. Reality reveals itself in the folds of consciousness. At first glance, it appears insightful, but probe it, ask what it really says, how it could be tested, what it excludes, and it disintegrates. The complexity was surface level. There is no bottom. This effect has been demonstrated experimentally. In studies, people rate syntactically correct but meaningless statements as profound. The structure mimics insight, but there is no referent. The depth is simulated. And yet not all depth is illusion. Some concepts are truly layered. Some systems reveal more as one explores further. In mathematics, a simple equation, e.g., Euler's identity, can unfold into vast implications. In literature, a short story can reflect an entire philosophy. In music, a repeated motif can contain emotional transformations over time. Depth is real. So what distinguishes real depth from its illusion? That's the paradox. Often one cannot tell at first. What appears profound might simply be opaque. What appears trivial might be rigorous. Time, context, and familiarity shape the experience. The same object can be deep for one person and flat for another. The distinction is not objective, it is relational. But the paradox goes further. Sometimes complexity masks absence. A system is built not to explain but to defend itself from questioning. Every critique is absorbed, every contradiction reframed. The appearance of depth becomes a defense mechanism. This is often seen in ideologies, jargon-laden theories, or esoteric traditions. The structure becomes recursive. The deeper one goes, the more one finds variations of the same. The illusion intensifies when the structure invites endless interpretation. A symbol that means everything ends up meaning nothing. The richness becomes noise. The map is so full of detail that it can't be used. Conversely, some systems appear flat but contain hidden intricacies. A rule in a game may seem arbitrary until one sees how it interacts with every other rule. A minimalist design may appear simple until one sees how constraint creates freedom. The paradox is that flatness and depth are not properties, they are perceptions shaped by context. In philosophy, this appears as the difference between essence and appearance. Does the thing have depth in itself, or only in how it's experienced? Is profundity an attribute or a projection? This touches on aesthetics. A painting might seem empty to one viewer and endlessly rich to another. The content hasn't changed, only the frame. The viewer brings meaning, the depth is co-created. In technology, the illusion of depth appears in user experience. A piece of software may seem complex because of its interface, nested menus, options, controls, but once understood, the actual function is limited. The complexity is cosmetic. Conversely, a clean interface may hide sophisticated capabilities, depth behind simplicity. In relationships, the paradox surfaces when a person appears mysterious. Their silence, their unpredictability, their intensity all signal depth, but sometimes that depth is projection. The mystery conceals emptiness. Other times, a quiet person reveals layers of thought, care, and complexity once one learns to listen differently. The paradox leads to a form of skepticism. One begins to ask, is this real depth or just a trick? Is this complexity meaningful or decorative? Is this idea profound or just vague? But the skepticism can become cynical. If one assumes all depth is illusion, one loses the capacity to be moved, surprised, transformed. One collapses everything into performance. Yet if one assumes all complexity is profound, one becomes gullible, vulnerable to manipulation by form over S. Obstinance. The paradox is to remain open to depth, to flatness, to the shifting nature of perception, while knowing that neither guarantees value. Sometimes what looks shallow is all there is. Sometimes what looks shallow is just the surface. And sometimes what looks deep never goes anywhere. The eye sees depth. The mind decides whether to keep walking. A sentence reads, yields falsehood when preceded by its quotation, yields falsehood when preceded by its quotation. At first it appears confusing, a linguistic tangle, a trick of syntax, but look again. The sentence refers to itself. It is an example of what it describes. It talks about the very act it performs, and in doing so it generates a paradox that resists simplification. This is the Quine Paradox, a self-referential structure that avoids direct quotation or obvious recursion, yet loops back on itself through indirect linguistic means. Named after the philosopher W.V.O. Quine, it challenges assumptions about language, truth, and self-reference. The paradox is subtle, elegant, and deeply destabilizing. At its core, the Quine Paradox constructs a sentence that says something about itself without using standard quotation marks or explicit indexing. It achieves self-reference not by pointing to itself, but by demonstrating the rule it invokes. This makes it different from the liar paradox, this sentence is false, which is straightforward in its self-negation. The Quine structure embeds the recursion within the grammatical function. Let's unpack it. Take the phrase, yields falsehood when preceded by its quotation. Now place that phrase after its own quotation. Yields falsehood when preceded by its quotation, yields falsehood when preceded by its quotation. The sentence is now a statement about itself. It claims that it becomes false when it is preceded by its own quotation, but it has just done that. So if the sentence is true, then it must be false. But if it's false, then what it asserts is not the case, meaning it does not yield falsehood when preceded by its quotation, which would make it true. The loop begins, true implies false implies true. The sentence floats in an unstable state. Like the liar paradox, it creates a truth-value contradiction. But its mechanism is more complex, indirect, compositional, linguistic. This is part of what makes the Quine Paradox fascinating. It emerges from the machinery of language, not just the content. It does not rely on a simple self-pointing gesture. It builds the loop out of grammar. In logic and philosophy of language, this paradox matters because it reveals how systems of reference can collapse under their own rules. If natural language permits constructions that lead to irresolvable contradictions, then truth itself becomes fragile. This touches on foundational issues in semantics. How do we assign meaning to a sentence that refers to itself indirectly? What happens when a name refers to the sentence in which it occurs? What are the limits of reference, and can any system fully contain them? Quine introduced this paradox not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a demonstration of the instability of self-reference in natural language. His broader philosophical work questioned the idea of fixed meanings and clear boundaries in language and logic. The paradox is an illustration, a kind of linguistic performance of that deeper skepticism. The structure also resonates with Gödel's incompleteness theorems, which use self-reference to show that formal systems cannot be both complete and consistent. Gödel constructed mathematical statements that effectively said, this statement cannot be proved. The Quine Paradox does something similar with ordinary language, showing that a sentence can both describe and exemplify a rule in a way that breaks the rule. In computer science, related structures appear in programs that output their own code, known as quins. A quine is a self-replicating program, one that prints itself without access to its own source. These constructions reveal the power and limitations of systems that manipulate symbols and the fragility of boundaries between data and instruction, description, and execution. But the paradox is not limited to abstract logic. It appears wherever systems try to describe themselves. A legal system that tries to regulate how laws are made, a philosophy that questions the basis of all philosophies, including itself, a mind that thinks about its own thinking. In each case, the system becomes the subject of its own rules, and contradictions emerge. So what's the resolution? Some argue that natural language is simply not equipped to handle this level of recursion cleanly, that formal systems must impose rules, types, hierarchies, restrictions to avoid these loops. In typed logic, a sentence cannot refer to itself directly, it must belong to a different level. But in everyday language, such distinctions are not enforced. The paradox slips through. Others embrace the instability. They argue that paradox is not a bug, but a feature, that language and thought are inherently reflexive, and that contradictions reveal the edge of expressibility. Still others see in the Quine Paradox a mirror for consciousness, an entity that observes itself, describes itself, and in doing so, narrates confusion. The mind is both the observer and the observed, the speaker and the sentence, and in that duality, paradox arises. The Quine Paradox does not break language, it illuminates its limits. It shows that meaning is not fixed, that reference can fold in on itself, that a sentence can contain its own collapse. And in doing so, it asks a deeper question. What happens when thought becomes the object of its own structure? You speak the sentence. It describes what it is. It performs what it claims. And in doing so, erases the line between truth and its own undoing. A person collapses on a busy street. Dozens of people pass by. Some slow down, glance, then move on. Others don't notice or pretend not to. Everyone assumes someone else will intervene. Minutes pass. No one helps. This is the paradox of the bystander effect, the contradiction that the more people are present in a crisis, the less likely it is that any one of them will help. Help requires only a single person to act, and yet, when many people are available, action becomes rarer. The paradox lies in the expectation. One might assume that help is more likely in a crowd, more potential helpers, more resources, more eyes, but in reality, help often comes quicker in isolation. One person alone with a victim is far more likely to respond than one person among 50. The problem is not indifference, it is diffusion. Responsibility becomes diluted in a group. Someone else will do something. Surely someone already has. I'm not qualified. I don't want to make a scene. The thought is not I won't help, but I probably don't need to. And because everyone thinks this, no one acts. The paradox grows sharper when one considers its implications. The presence of more potential saviors decreases the likelihood of salvation. Goodness, rather than multiplying, thins. The very abundance of agency erodes its use. This was first demonstrated in social psychology in the 1960s after the murder of Kitty Genovese in New York. Early reports, since contested, claimed that dozens of people heard her cries and did nothing. Whether the details were accurate, the idea struck a nerve. The image of a society so crowded it became inert. Later experiments confirmed the effect. In staged emergencies, smoke filling a room, someone falling from a chair, individuals were far more likely to help when alone. In groups, the response time slowed, sometimes to zero. What causes this? Part of it is social proof. In uncertain situations, people look to others to determine appropriate behavior. If others seem unconcerned, the situation appears less serious. The danger is misclassified as non-emergency, and the loop tightens. Everyone sees everyone else doing nothing and assumes that nothing needs to be done. Another factor is fear of error. Public mistakes carry social cost. If one rushes to help and it turns out to be unnecessary, one risks embarrassment. So inaction becomes a form of caution, not because nothing should be done, but because no one wants to do the wrong thing. The paradox, then, is not only behavioral, it is epistemological. One's sense of reality is shaped by others' responses, but others' responses are shaped by that same sense. The result is a loop of misperception. This structure extends beyond emergencies. In organizations, problems may go unaddressed because that's someone else's department. In politics, injustices may persist because someone else will protest. In daily life, small kindnesses are left undone because someone else has probably taken care of it. Responsibility becomes passive, agency becomes abstract, and the collective capacity for action diminishes precisely because it is shared. But the paradox goes deeper still. The bystander effect suggests that moral action is not just about intention or values, it is about structure. The context of decision-making can override character. A kind person in the wrong crowd may act cruelly by omission. A brave person in a group may freeze. This challenges narratives of individual heroism. We think of moral courage as a trait, something possessed. But the bystander effect shows that context can suppress it. The same person may act in one setting and fail in another. And yet there are exceptions. Sometimes someone breaks the loop, one person acts, and that action changes the structure, others follow. A new social proof is created, one that affirms intervention. In this way, the paradox contains its own resolution. The same mechanism that causes inaction can also enable action. If people look to others for cues, then modeling courage becomes contagious. Responsibility, like fear, can spread. This leads to a crucial insight. The crowd is not inherently passive, it is unstable. It can tilt toward apathy or toward help, depending on what is made visible. To understand the bystander paradox is to see that moral behavior is not simply a matter of good people making good choices. It is a system, a pattern of feedback loops, hesitations, and perceptions. To change it, one must intervene at the level of perception. Make action visible. Make help expected. Make responsibility personal, even when it is shared. The paradox remains that when many can act, no one may act. That when help is everyone's job, it becomes no one's. And that in the moment of crisis, silence is often multiplied. Not by malice, but by the quiet comfort of deferral. Until someone steps forward and breaks the loop. Imagine a machine that erases memories perfectly, not blurs them, not represses them, but removes them entirely. You enter, press a button, and a specific event vanishes. A mistake, a grief, a shame, gone, no recollection, no emotional residue. You emerge clean, you feel lighter, perhaps. You cannot remember what was taken, and that is the point. But then the question comes, if the memory is gone, who are you now? This is the memory wipe paradox, the contradiction between forgetting something completely and remaining the same person. If memories make up identity, then deleting them must alter the self. But if you do not remember what was removed, how can you know what has changed? You forget, but you feel different, or maybe you don't, because the difference is precisely that you no longer notice. Your sense of continuity remains intact, but that continuity might be false. It may be the illusion of a person who no longer includes parts of themselves. The paradox lies in this invisibility. The transformation has occurred, but it cannot be seen. The memory was the evidence, and the evidence is gone. This raises a deeper problem: what anchors identity over time? We assume that the self is a continuity, an arc from childhood to now, but that arc is constructed through memory, not just facts and dates, but emotional associations, private stories, decisions, consequences. If a memory vanishes, part of that construction collapses, the narrative changes. But if the mind adjusts to fill in the gap, if it patches the story seamlessly, then the loss becomes undetectable. You don't know who you used to be, and yet you continue being someone. This is not hypothetical. Amnesia, trauma, neurodegeneration all can erase memory. Patients forget children, partners, entire lifetimes. And still they walk, speak, smile. They are not blank slates, but they are not the same. The memory is gone, the personality shifts. So what happens if you choose to forget? In fiction, memory wipes are used to escape. A painful relationship, a crime, a past life. But even in fantasy, the tension appears. If you erase the cause of guilt, do you erase the guilt itself? If you erase the knowledge of wrongdoing, are you still responsible? The paradox presses, you acted, but now you do not remember. Are you the same person? Can someone be held accountable for a decision they no longer remember making? Legally, this is complex. Morally, it is more so. But the paradox continues deeper. If forgetting can reshape identity, then remembering is also a choice or at least a structure. What we hold on to defines who we believe we are, but we forget constantly, not by machines but by time. Faces fade, details blur, entire years become shadows, and yet we still speak of ourselves as if the thread is unbroken. Perhaps the thread is imaginary, a story told by a system that edits itself constantly. In this view, the self is not a fixed entity, but a loop, memory feeding identity, identity shaping memory. To erase a memory is to snip part of that loop. The system may continue spinning, but its orbit shifts. The paradox becomes, how can you know who you are if part of you is missing? And the answer is, you can't, but you believe you do. That belief is constructed from what remains. This also touches on therapeutic forgetting, the desire to let go of pain. Move on, put it behind you, but if the memory remains, even buried, it may still shape behavior, emotion, decisions. So one might say, I don't remember, but I feel something. The body remembers what the mind has erased. But if the memory is truly gone, surgically removed, with no echo, then even the feeling vanishes. And with it, the source of empathy, of understanding, of depth. Who is left? A simpler version. A diminished version. A free version. The paradox is that erasing pain might also erase growth. The cost of forgetting is not only the memory, it is everything that grew around it. Strength, perspective, restraint, wisdom. If you forget what broke you, you may lose what made you stronger. And yet forgetting may be mercy. Some memories are cages, some loops are traps. The self that clings to pain may be less free than the one who forgets. But freedom through forgetting is a kind of death, not of the body, but of a version of the self. So the paradox remains. To forget is to heal and to lose. To remember is to hurt and to remain whole. To be yourself is to be a person made of memories. But which memories? And what happens when the scaffolding is removed? You walk away from the machine. You smile. You don't know what was taken, but you feel light. And somewhere behind the silence, something is missing that you will never find again. You carry an umbrella, the sky is clear. You keep it with you every day just in case. Weeks go by, it never rains, and you start to wonder, is the umbrella the reason it does? Would you still stay dry if you left it at home? The moment you stop carrying it, it will rain, but because you carry it, it never does. So the tool does its job by never being used. This is the useless tool paradox, the contradiction in which the very possession of a thing seems to prevent its necessity. The better prepared you are, the less likely you are to need what you've prepared, and if the tool is never used, its usefulness becomes invisible, or worse, questionable. The paradox lies in the loop. You carry the tool to protect against a condition that never arrives, so the protection feels unnecessary. But if you removed it, the condition might return precisely because the tool is no longer present. It's not just about umbrellas. A smoke detector that never goes off, a vaccine that prevents a disease you'll never know you almost had, a safety net that's never fallen into. These are all tools whose success is measured by their silence. But how do you value something that works only by not being needed? The tool becomes a kind of ghost, always present, never active. It creates safety, but invisibly. It shapes outcomes through prevention, not reaction. And because nothing happens, it seems like nothing is happening. This is the heart of the paradox. Effective tools disappear behind their own success. You invest in security. Nothing gets stolen. You install backups. Your data never crashes. You train in CPR. No one ever collapses. Eventually, the preparation begins to feel absurd. You start asking, is this overkill? Could I have done without it? But that question assumes the world would stay the same without the preparation. It forgets that the preparation itself might shape the world. There's a name for this in risk management, the preparedness paradox. When you're well prepared, disasters don't seem to happen, so people begin to think the risk was exaggerated, funding is cut, systems are dismantled, and eventually the disaster comes not because it was inevitable, but because the thing that was preventing it is gone. It's also called the paradox of success. Success erases the memory of the effort that made it possible. This happens socially. Peace is maintained through diplomacy, deterrence, infrastructure. But when peace endures, people begin to believe it's natural. the effort becomes invisible. The system that works disappears into background. And so support weakens, maintenance lapses, the system decays, and then the thing that never happened happens again. The paradox repeats on personal levels. You meditate daily to reduce anxiety, you feel calm, so you wonder, do I still need this? You take medication that keeps symptoms at bay, but because the symptoms are gone, the need for medication is doubted. You create boundaries to protect your energy and feel safe, but because nothing crosses the boundary, you wonder if it was needed at all. The paradox loops. The better something works, the less visible its function becomes, and the more likely it is to be abandoned. And yet when it's gone, its absence is felt instantly. The umbrella is useless until the day it rains. The smoke detector is silent until the fire. The parachute is a burden until the moment it is. So what do we call a tool that only works when it isn't used? Precaution, protection, insurance, wisdom. But the psychological tension remains. Humans seek evidence. And when something prevents harm successfully, no evidence appears. It becomes hard to believe in something whose success looks like nothing. This touches on deeper philosophical concerns. How do we value the invisible? How do we measure absence? How do we trust a defense that, by definition, erases the thing it defends against? The paradox is that a tool's effectiveness becomes its own undoing. Because it works, it looks like it wasn't needed. Because it wasn't needed, we question its value. Because we question its value, we stop using it. And then, finally, we realize why it mattered. The tool that feels useless is often the one that changed the outcome before it even began. And so you carry the umbrella. Not because it's raining, but because it might. And because if it never rains, that might be why. A system is broken, a solution is applied, it works. At first, symptoms subside, the crisis is paused. Encouraged by success, the solution is scaled up, extended, reinforced. But over time, the system changes in response. New problems emerge, more complex, more resistant. A new solution is introduced, then another. The structure becomes tangled. Each fix requires another. The system is no longer recovering, it is spiraling. This is the escalation paradox. The more you try to fix a problem, the worse it gets. Not because you are failing to fix it, but because the act of fixing becomes part of the problem. Interventions mutate the system. What once helped now harms. What once solved now sustains. The logic behind the first fix was sound. Address the issue, reduce the harm, stabilize the situation. But the fix shifts the dynamics. It alters incentives. It creates dependencies. Unintended consequences appear. The solution breeds side effects that look like new problems. These problems demand new solutions, and the loop tightens. This structure repeats across domains. In medicine, a drug suppresses a symptom but damages another organ. A second drug treats the damage but weakens the immune system. A third drug becomes necessary. The original condition is now obscured beneath layers of side effects. In economics, bailouts prevent collapse but encourage reckless behavior. Regulation increases. Resistance to regulation increases. Each attempt to restore balance creates new imbalances. The paradox emerges most clearly when each fix seems reasonable. No single decision is irrational, but their accumulation produces dysfunction. Like adding more scaffolding to a crumbling wall, the support eventually becomes the structure. The system is held together by its own repairs. If the scaffolding is removed, everything falls. Escalation often comes with momentum. A fix partially succeeds, so it is repeated. Repetition creates institutional inertia. The system becomes optimized for the fix, not for the problem. Resources are diverted, metrics are adjusted, whole organizations are built around the act of intervention. Eventually, no one remembers what the original issue looked like. The paradox is not simply about unintended consequences, it is about recursive ones, fixes that generate the need for more fixes, a circular pattern of self-sustaining action. The problem becomes the justification for its own endless management. At the core is a failure to recognize system feedback. Complex systems adapt, they resist intervention, they respond in nonlinear ways. The fix does not freeze the system, it provokes it. The response alters the terrain, and the next fix is built on that altered ground. The logic of control becomes the logic of escalation. But doing nothing is not neutral. Problems grow if left unaddressed. Harms spread. The instinct to act is not wrong, it is human. The paradox is that sometimes action locks the system in a new kind of failure, one that looks like progress. Escalation also distorts perception. If fixes are constant, people forget what stability looked like, crisis becomes normal, emergency procedures become policy, triage becomes design. The fix is no longer temporary, it is permanent. Over time, belief in the original system fades. People trust the fixes more than the foundation, but the fixes are layered on distortion. They do not repair, they reshape, and what they reshape may be harder to live with than what they replaced. The escalation paradox does not accuse, it observes that systems resist being fixed, that every action changes the system it addresses, that sometimes the best way to help is to stop helping, not from neglect, but from humility. This is not passivity, it is awareness, that every fix must be judged not only by what it changes, but by what it demands next, that true solutions reduce the need for themselves, that escalation is a signal, a symptom that the system is not healing, only adapting to the pressure. To resolve the paradox is not to stop intervening, it is to recognize when intervention is perpetuating itself, to notice when help becomes habit, when control becomes reflex, when the desire to do something has replaced the clarity of what should be done. Escalation does not always look like failure. It can look like effort, like commitment, like dedication, but underneath it is exhaustion, a system running in place, a fix fixing a fix, a loop tightening. The hardest solution is to step back, to stop doing more, to ask if less is better, to accept that some systems heal not through effort but through release. The paradox remains that solving can create solving, that repair can require repair. That help endlessly applied may prevent the very recovery it seeks. And that sometimes the only real fix is to stop fixing. You open a file, it's small, just a few kilobytes, but it expands. Inside is a zip folder, inside that another and another. Each folder contains more folders, each labeled the same, each seemingly identical. You keep opening, no end, no final file, just layers, always another level. The computer doesn't crash, the folder tree continues. Somehow, the finite space holds something infinite. This is the digital infinity paradox, the illusion of infinite structure embedded in a limited system. A finite machine, a finite file, giving rise to an experience that feels unbounded. It's not just a glitch. It's a design, recursive compression, self-reference, encoded repetition. The paradox is that the system is bounded, but the experience of exploring it is not. This is not fantasy, it's how data works. A small set of rules can generate massive results. A few lines of code can produce an entire fractal. A simple function can describe endless complexity. Compression allows a long message to be stored in short form. Procedural generation allows vast worlds to be built from seeds. The content seems limitless. The storage remains fixed. Digital infinity is not actual infinity. It's virtual, potential, emergent, recursive, but it feels infinite when engaged. The mind, tracing the layers, cannot find the bottom. The illusion becomes convincing. The paradox arises because we intuitively associate size with capacity. A larger book contains more story. A bigger drive holds more data. But in the digital realm, size and depth diverge. A file can be tiny and still unfold endlessly. A simulation can generate new terrain indefinitely. A string of numbers can define a world. This redefines the concept of information. It's not about quantity, but about rules. A short instruction set can describe infinite patterns. The constraint is not what's stored, but how it unfolds. In theory, this is related to Turing machines, abstract models of computation that, given a set of rules and enough time, can produce arbitrarily complex output. The machine is finite. The process is unending. In practice, we see this in games, art, software. A generative artwork evolves endlessly, though it begins with a tiny script. A blockchain contains megabytes but stores years of transactions. The appearance of infinity lives inside repetition, compression, reference. The paradox appears in nested systems, files within files, videos that play videos, desktops within desktops. The recursion loops, the screen mirrors itself. A camera pointed at a monitor creates a tunnel of light, a cascade of reflections. The structure is bounded, the visual experience is not. It also appears in perception. A pattern repeats. You zoom in, it reveals more, zoom again, more detail. A fractal, the Mandelbrot set, the edge never resolves, the complexity continues. but the image is built from a single formula, a few characters of code repeating endlessly. The paradox becomes sharper in identity. A person contains a finite number of memories, thoughts, traits, but the self feels infinite. You think about yourself, then you think about thinking, then about thinking about thinking. The loop never closes. Consciousness, like code, recurses. Digital infinity reveals that infinite experience can arise from finite structure. That limitlessness can be generated, not stored. That perception, not substance, defines scale. But this creates tension. If a small thing can feel infinite, how do we measure depth? If a file opens forever, when is it full? If a system recurses endlessly, when is it complete? The paradox challenges the assumption that more is bigger, that complexity requires mass. It suggests that complexity is a trick of form, that depth is an illusion made from loops. It also touches fear. In code, an infinite loop is a failure, a process that never halts. The system hangs, memory overflows, crashes occur. What seemed clever becomes dangerous. Infinity becomes dysfunction. So we build limits, stop conditions, safety valves, but even with those, the illusion persists. A simulation doesn't have to go on forever. It only has to go on long enough to feel like it could. The digital infinity paradox is not just about files. It is about how structure, perception, and recursion combine to generate the feeling of endlessness from parts that are very much finite. The system ends, but the mirror keeps reflecting. The folder stops, but you remember going deeper. The data is small, but your mind got lost inside. A man with a beard loses a single hair. He still has a beard. He loses another, still a beard. One more again, no change. This continues. At no point does a single missing hair seem enough to eliminate the beard, and yet at some point the beard is gone. But where did it go? Which exact hair was the turning point? This is the beard paradox, also known as the Sorites paradox, a problem of vague predicates and indistinct boundaries. It arises when small changes, each imperceptible on their own, accumulate into a significant transformation without a clear point at which the change becomes real. The structure is simple. If one hair doesn't make a difference, and two don't either, and three still don't, then, by that logic, a man with no hair should still be said to have a beard. But clearly, that conclusion is absurd. So somewhere along the way, something changed. But where? The paradox is that no individual step seems sufficient, yet the result is total. This doesn't just apply to beards, it applies to everything with gradual change. When does a person become bald? When does a pile of sand stop being a pile? When does someone become old? When does day become night? There's no precise threshold, and yet, we believe the categories are real. The paradox isn't about language failing, it's about language working too well in situations it was never built for. Words like beard, bald, tall, heap, rich, poor, all are vague, they're useful, but they don't map neatly onto the continuous, sliding nature of reality. In formal logic, this is a problem. Logic likes precision, clear boundaries, but vagueness resists formal capture. It creates a gap between how we use language and how systems expect language to behave. So what do we do with that gap? One response is to force precision. Define a beard as any set of facial hairs numbering over 3,000, or call someone tall only if they are exactly over 182.5 centimeters. This gives us clarity, but also absurdity. It imposes sharp borders on things that are naturally soft. It ignores how language is actually used. Another response is to accept fuzziness, to allow for degrees. Instead of saying someone is or isn't tall, say they're more or less tall. Replace binary labels with gradients. This feels more accurate, but it complicates everything. If everyone is somewhere on the scale, where do categories go? This leads to a deeper tension. Categories are tools for thinking. They simplify a complex world, but the world is not made of categories. It is made of continuities. And the beard paradox is what happens when the mind's simplifications run into the world's messiness. The paradox appears in ethics. When does a white lie become a serious deception? When does self-interest become selfishness? When does care become control? The transitions are slow, the effects accumulate, the line blurs. It appears in identity. When does a child become an adult? When does a person change enough to be considered different? There's no day, no moment, but the shift is real. It appears in culture. When does a trend become a movement? When does a joke become a stereotype? When does freedom become chaos? The beard paradox shows that our categories are conveniences, not absolutes. They help us speak, but they don't always help us know. So what's the answer? Maybe there isn't one. Maybe the paradox is not a problem to solve, but a feature to notice. It reminds us that the world is not carved into clear shapes. That change happens by degrees, that identities blur, that meaning shifts. And yet we go on using language as if the categories are solid, because they work until they don't, until we try to draw a line, until someone asks, at what point does it stop being a beard? And we realize we don't know. Only that it's there. And then it is. And somewhere in between. We were sure we could tell the difference. You swallow your saliva all the time, without thinking, dozens of times a day. It's automatic, neutral, unnoticed. But now imagine spitting that saliva into a clean glass, then, after a few seconds, drinking it back. Most people hesitate, some refuse. The idea feels wrong. Even though nothing has changed, it's still your saliva. It came from your mouth, it's still clean, but somehow it became disgusting. This is the saliva paradox, the reversal of emotional response to a substance purely through a shift in context. The paradox lies in the fact that something neutral or even necessary becomes repulsive once removed and reintroduced. The substance didn't change, the feeling did. The act of separation turned it into something else. It raises a strange question. How can a thing that's part of you become unacceptable to you? The answer is not chemical, it's conceptual. Saliva in your mouth is safe. Saliva outside your mouth becomes contaminated, not biologically, but psychologically. The transition from internal to external triggers a reclassification. It becomes waste, even though nothing about it has changed. This touches on the psychology of disgust, an emotion evolved to protect us from disease, decay, and contamination. But disgust is not rational. It is reactive, fast, deeply embedded, and sometimes it misfires. It treats harmless things as threats, not because of what they are, but because of how they appear. The saliva paradox is not unique. Variants appear everywhere. You touch your skin, fine. You find a hair in your food, revolting. Even if it's your own hair, you touch your socks, normal. You find your sock in soup, revolting. The object has not changed, only its position has. Context transforms substance. This extends beyond the body. Food waste is just yesterday's dinner. Sewage is just water and organic matter. The same molecules reappear in different forms, and the reaction shifts with the label. The paradox is that the disgust is not in the thing, but in the meaning we give it. And that meaning can flip instantly. A clean glass of water is inviting. A stranger takes a sip, then hands it to you. Suddenly it's undrinkable. Nothing visible changed. But the idea of contamination intrudes, even if the person is healthy, even if the glass is still objectively clean. This shows that disgust is symbolic. It draws boundaries between self and other, inside and outside, pure and impure. And those boundaries are deeply arbitrary. They follow intuition, not logic. They evolve culturally, not biologically. In some societies, fermented foods are delicacies. In others, they are abominations. Some people eat insects, others recoil. Some cultures bathe in what others would call filth. The object does not determine the response. The frame does. But this raises a question about identity. If you reject your own saliva once it's outside you, what does that say about your relationship to your body? Are you a stable self, or just a shifting set of boundaries, comfort lines that move with context? The paradox also touches on morality. Many moral taboos feel like disgust, visceral reactions to violations. But if disgust can be flipped by context, how stable are those judgments? If swallowing spit is fine in your mouth, but gross in a glass, then what else might feel wrong only because of framing? And how many of our reactions are built on inherited reflex, not reflection? The saliva paradox is simple, but it points to something deep, that we live in a world shaped not only by matter, but by the meanings we give to matter, and those meanings are fragile. You drink your saliva, you have to, but you won't drink it from a cup. Not because it's changed, but because your mind says it has. And once the label flips, the body follows. Disgust is not in the spit. It's in the story. And the story is yours. You sit down, you want to relax, so you take a deep breath, close your eyes, and try to let go. You tell your thoughts to quiet down, you try to be calm, you try not to try, you push towards stillness. and the harder you push, the further it slips away. Every effort you make to relax becomes another form of tension. Every attempt to stop trying is itself trying, so you try harder, then softer, then give up. And in the moment you give up completely, maybe, just for a second, something shifts. You feel what you were looking for, not because you found it, but because you stopped looking. This is the paradox of effort, the contradiction that sometimes the more you try to achieve a certain state, the less likely you are to reach it, especially if that state is defined by the absence of effort itself. Trying to not try, willing yourself into spontaneity, forcing naturalness. These are contradictions not in theory but in lived experience. You can't relax by commanding yourself to relax. You can't fall asleep by deciding to fall asleep. You can't be free by demanding freedom. The very act of effort contradicts the goal. This paradox appears in philosophy, in psychology, in meditation, in sports, in art. Anywhere that human attention turns inward, it begins to surface. It is not a puzzle of logic, it is a tension of consciousness. In ancient Taoist philosophy, this paradox was identified over 2,000 years ago. The term wu wei, often translated as non-action or effortless action, describes a state of being in which one acts in harmony with the world, without forcing, without striving, without resistance. To act without acting, to flow rather than control. But how do you get there? How do you attain wu wei? As soon as you pursue it, you've lost it. As soon as you try to be natural, you become artificial. The effort to reach effortlessness breaks the very thing it seeks. This paradox of effort is also central to Zen Buddhism. The concept of no mind, mushin, refers to a mental state of spontaneous presence, alert, calm, unattached. But trying to achieve no mind through effort only strengthens the ego, the controller, the one who wants to manipulate inner experience. The harder you try, the more mind you have. The pursuit of emptiness fills the space. The paradox takes shape most clearly when the desired state is incompatible with control. If a state requires surrender, trust, or openness, then effort, which is fundamentally a form of control, interferes. You can't force trust. You can't command yourself to be spontaneous. You can't will yourself into letting go. The contradiction is immediate. You must do something, but the doing itself is the obstacle. This isn't limited to mystical traditions. Athletes know it. A basketball player overthinks a free throw and misses. A pianist focuses on every finger and loses the rhythm. A sprinter tightens up before the race and slows down. They call it choking, performing worse precisely because you want so badly to perform well. There's a psychological mechanism at play. Conscious effort can interfere with processes that function best unconsciously. Muscle memory, habit, flow. These systems are built through repetition and they operate best when trusted. When the conscious mind steps in, usually during stress or pressure, it disrupts the automation. The more you try, the more you disturb the thing that works best without trying. This is the paradox of flow, the state of being completely absorbed in a task where action and awareness merge. Flow states are deeply rewarding, highly productive, and effortlessly focused. But the moment you ask yourself, am I in flow? You're not. The self-awareness breaks the immersion. Trying to get into flow blocks flow. Flow happens when you stop trying to enter it. This paradox also appears in therapy and mental health. Consider anxiety. If you try to relax by forcefully pushing away anxious thoughts, you end up focusing on them more. The act of suppression strengthens them. You become anxious about being anxious. A feedback loop forms. Effort fuels the very thing it seeks to eliminate. Or consider insomnia. The effort to fall asleep often prolongs wakefulness. You lie in bed trying to relax, trying to clear your mind, trying to drift off. But trying keeps you alert. The body becomes tense. The mind races. You check the clock. You try harder. And the harder you try, the further sleep moves. Sleep, like relaxation, can't be commanded, it must be allowed. In these cases, the solution often involves doing less, acceptance, observing without interfering, allowing thoughts and feelings to rise and fall without resistance. But even this becomes a trap. You try to accept, you try to be non-resistant, and so the loop returns. The paradox of effort is recursive. Every time you think you've escaped it, the effort to escape becomes a new form of effort. Every letting go can become another way of holding on. You cannot defeat it by outsmarting it. You can only see it, and sometimes, in seeing it clearly, the loop softens. Even in ordinary goals, this paradox sneaks in. You want to be liked, so you try to be likable, but the effort reads as needy. You try to be confident, but trying to be confident is the opposite of being confident. You try to be natural, but now you're rehearsing your authenticity. The effort shines through. The performance is visible, and that visibility undermines the effect. This is why genuine charisma, presence, and ease can't be faked. They emerge when effort drops away. When a person is not trying to be anything in particular, they simply are. Their attention isn't on themselves, it's on the world, on the task, on the other person. And paradoxically, that's when they become most magnetic. So what's the way out of the paradox? There is no exit, only recognition. You can't overcome the paradox by defeating it. You can only stop fueling it. The loop continues as long as you believe you can win it by trying harder. But once you see the loop for what it is, a structure, a reflex, it begins to unwind. This doesn't mean giving up, it means shifting how effort is applied, not toward control but toward awareness, toward seeing, not forcing. In mindfulness practice, this is the essence, noticing without interfering, letting thoughts come and go without attaching, resisting, or correcting. Effort is still present, but it's effort directed toward being with what is, rather than trying to change what is. This is not passive, it's not surrendering in defeat, it's an active openness, a choice to let go of control in favor of contact. In doing so, paradoxically, the result often arrives. You relax, you sleep, you perform, not because you forced it, but because you stopped forcing. The paradox of effort teaches a simple but difficult truth. Not everything can be achieved by trying. Some things arise when effort ends, when the hand releases, when the mind steps back, when the self disappears. And in that moment, just for a breath, you find what you were looking for. Not because you reached it, but because you stopped reaching. You set the alarm, you close your eyes, you drift off. Hours pass. Then without sound, without vibration, without external cue, your eyes open. You reach for the phone, 6:59, 1 minute before the alarm, you lie still. You don't remember stirring, you don't remember deciding, you just woke, as if some part of you had been watching, as if the waking had been expected, as if you never needed the alarm at all. The paradox is simple. You were supposed to wake because the alarm rang, but instead you woke because the alarm was set, not because it went off, but because you believed it would. The very expectation of an external prompt caused the internal system to act first. You relied on the device, and in doing so, made it unnecessary. The trust in the future event became the event's true trigger. This is the alarm clock paradox, a structure in which the mere anticipation of a signal leads to action before the signal arrives, a loop where belief replaces cause, a sequence in which the thing you installed to prompt change is outpaced by your readiness for it. The cause and the expectation merge, and in merging, the origin dissolves. At the surface, the event is ordinary, waking up before an alarm, but beneath that surface lies a deeper contradiction, the tension between external structure and internal agency. The paradox is not about waking early, it is about who woke you, about how a future certainty shaped a present decision, even in the absence of conscious control. The biology offers scaffolding. The human body maintains circadian rhythms, governed by oscillations in hormones, light exposure, and time cues. Cortisol begins to rise in the early morning hours. Melatonin production wanes. The body prepares for waking even before awareness returns. In habitual schedules, the brain anticipates. Sleep cycles realign. Neural systems recognize when waking is likely and edge the organism toward it. But biology does not erase the paradox, it sharpens it. The brain prepared to wake at 7:00 not because it was told to, but because you intended it. The preparation was real, but it was anchored to an artificial construct, the belief in a scheduled event. The alarm was not a physical stimulus. It was a mental orientation, a cognitive placeholder, a boundary in time that the unconscious learned to respect. The question becomes, what role does belief play in shaping action when no action is consciously taken? A clock does not care whether you trust it, but your brain does. The act of setting an alarm is not just logistical, it is psychological. It commits you to a future, it implies structure. That structure is registered by the systems that regulate attention, rest, vigilance. The alarm becomes a kind of pact between the conscious and unconscious self. You set it, your body listens. It prepares silently to meet the expectation you won't remember forming. The paradox reappears in other domains. Consider placebo. A pill with no active ingredient is taken for pain. The pain lessens, not because of chemistry, but because of expectation. The patient believes relief will come. That belief shapes neural activity. Neurotransmitters release, blood vessels expand, muscles relax. The body responds to an illusion, not because the illusion is real, but because belief carries physiological weight. Or consider performance. An athlete imagines the perfect movement, they rehearse success, they expect fluidity, and then when the moment comes, the body performs what was already anticipated, not because the muscles were forced, but because the belief shaped their readiness. Expectation becomes architecture. The map precedes the territory. But what makes the alarm clock paradox distinct is that it occurs without rehearsal, without attention, without will. You fall asleep, you forget, and still the expectation acts, a form of belief without active belief, a memory without image, a timer set without counting. This suggests that the unconscious is not passive. It is responsive, predictive, watchful. It anticipates what the conscious mind has left behind. The belief did not fade during sleep. It persisted not as thought but as orientation. The system knew what it was waiting for, and in waiting it became ready, ready enough to make the waiting obsolete. The paradox destabilizes causality. If you woke because you believed you would, then what caused what? Was the alarm ever the trigger, or was it a symbolic gesture meant not to wake you, but to train the system that would? This recursive structure appears in philosophy. In predictive coding theories of mind, the brain does not passively receive data, it predicts it. Sensory input is compared to expected input. What matches is reinforced. What deviates is corrected. Consciousness becomes not a window, but a feedback loop, belief shaping experience, and experience refining belief. In this framework, waking up before the alarm is not an error. It is a successful predictee. The brain anticipated the moment and brought the body into alignment. The paradox becomes a feature, not a flaw. But the implications extend further. If belief can replace a signal, then belief can become a kind of signal. If you expect stress, the body prepares for it. If you expect failure, you tighten, hesitate, withdraw. If you expect pain, you flinch before the wound. The body responds not to reality, but to its imagined future. And that imagined future becomes the thing most real. This is the darker side of the paradox. The alarm doesn't have to ring, the belief was enough. But if the belief shifts, if you no longer trust that waking will come, then perhaps it doesn't. You oversleep, you miss appointments, you stop responding to clocks, not because they failed, but because the mental structure that used to hold time together is no longer intact. The paradox cuts both ways. Belief awakens, but belief also silences. It's not just about waking, it's about responsiveness. The entire system of behavior is built on timing, when to act, when to pause, when to prepare. That timing is not just external, it is internalized. The self becomes a rhythm structured by what it expects. And those expectations can be manipulated. What happens when belief is hijacked? When systems are built to exploit predictive behavior, a notification appears. You feel the need to check it even before it buzzes. The phone is silent, but you feel the phantom vibration. You wake not because you needed to, but because the system trained you to. The alarm is no longer physical. It lives in the nervous anticipation of interruption. The alarm clock paradox reveals that the boundary between control and surrender is not clear. You think you installed a backup. What you installed was a loop, a structure that once set acted without you. You were not woken by the alarm. You were woken by the memory of setting it. The action was performed by a version of you that existed only in preparation, and that version succeeded, without being awake, without being aware. The structure becomes recursive. You act now, trusting a future response. That response arrives not as reaction, but as fulfillment. You wake not because of the world, but because of the structure you left behind. It is not magic, it is not mystery, it is memory reorganized into rhythm. And the paradox remains. You woke because the alarm was set. But you woke before the alarm rang. So what exactly woke you? Not sound, not command, not noise, only structure, only belief, only the echo of an action performed in silence, and answered without your permission. You pass it every day, the picture on the wall, the corner of the table, the sound the door makes when it shuts. You know it, but you no longer see it. It's there, and it's gone not in space, but in awareness. This is the paradox of familiarity, the contradiction in which what is closest becomes invisible. The more present something is, the more it fades from perception. What you see too often, you stop seeing. What surrounds you continuously becomes background, not because it's unimportant, but because it's stable. The mind is built to notice change. It tunes out repetition. It highlights disruption. The new is given priority. The known is compressed. The familiar becomes structure, and structure becomes silent. This isn't neglect, it's efficiency. If you registered every repeated detail of your world, your thoughts would drown in noise. So the brain filters. You don't feel the weight of your clothes. You don't hear your own footsteps. You don't notice your own handwriting. They've become too known to require observation. But that same mechanism blinds you to what matters. You stop seeing the person you live with the way you saw them in the beginning. You stop hearing the tone of their voice. You stop noticing the way their hand moves when they speak, not because they've changed, but because you've adapted. Familiarity has softened the edges of perception. What was once vivid becomes assumed. It happens to places. You move through your home without looking at it. You walk a route without registering its turns. The environment is absorbed, mapped, flattened. You see it as space, not as detail. It happens to time. Routine compresses memory. Days without contrast blend. The week disappears. The month blurs. What was full becomes thin. It happens to the self. You are with yourself always, and because of that you overlook yourself. The way you move, the way you think, the way you respond, these become scripts, not because they lack meaning, but because they're too familiar to be examined. The paradox is that the most essential things are often the least noticed, and the more central something is, the more likely it is to dissolve into the fabric of normalcy. But the moment it's gone, it becomes visible again. You notice the hum of the refrigerator only when it stops. You feel the weight of a friend only when they're no longer sitting beside you. You hear silence because it replaced a sound you forgot you were hearing. The paradox isn't solved by replacing the familiar with the new. Newness becomes familiar too. The cycle is inevitable. But it can be interrupted not by change, but by attention. Looking again, listening again, returning to what you thought you knew and seeing it as if you didn't. Familiarity hides what's most present. But presence can be restored, not by moving away, but by truly looking where you already are. The preemptive self paradox is what happens when you try to fix a version of yourself that doesn't exist yet. When you try to change before you become the person who needs changing. When you see a problem before it happens, and in trying to prevent it, you bring it into being. It begins with a thought, small, subtle. Maybe you're standing in front of a mirror. Maybe you're thinking about tomorrow, a date, a meeting, a confrontation, something important. And you hear the voice, don't mess this up. You pause. You try to prepare, you play out what could go wrong, you imagine yourself saying the wrong thing, forgetting, freezing, failing, and so you adjust, you rehearse, you course correct. You don't just get ready, you try to become someone else, someone better, someone cleaner, stronger, smarter, you preempt the future. And it works, kind of. You walk into the room, you play your part, and things go smoothly, mostly, but something's off, something doesn't feel like you. And after, when it's all over, you lie awake replaying the moment, wondering who was actually there. Was it you? Or the version of you designed to prevent what you feared? That's the paradox. You become so afraid of who you might be that you become someone else entirely to avoid it, and in doing so you prove that the fear was real. Because if the you silenced was dangerous enough to suppress, then maybe it was already broken, already wrong, already guilty. So now you live in loops of preemption. You fix feelings before you feel them. You avoid conversations before they happen. You end things before they can end you. You think you're protecting yourself, but you're not. You're preventing yourself from arriving, from unfolding, from existing. You begin to believe that you are a threat to your own future, that your real self will ruin things if left unchecked. So you don't leave anything to chance. You monitor your tone, your posture, your thoughts. You pre-apologize in your head. You shrink before anyone can ask you to. You make yourself smaller so no one else has to. It becomes habit, strategy, survival, but it also becomes prison. You are no longer reacting to reality, you are reacting to imagined failure. And that imagined failure becomes real, not because it happens, but because you act like it already has. You flinch before the hit. You say sorry before the blame. You abandon yourself before anyone else can, and the world rewards you. People say you're self-aware, considerate, disciplined. They admire how much control you have, but they don't see the cost. They don't see the version of you left behind, the one you never gave a chance. The one who never got to speak freely, breathe freely, be freely. Because you decided they were dangerous. You decided they'd ruin things, and so they disappeared, but not fully. They linger in dreams, in impulses, in the moments when your guard slips and you say something surprising and then panic. That wasn't me, you think, but maybe it was. Maybe that was the real you, unfiltered, unplanned, unpreempted, and maybe you didn't ruin anything. Maybe you just existed briefly before the mask slid back into place. This is what the preemptive self paradox does. It creates a war inside you, a conflict between who you are and who you think you need to be to keep your world intact. And the more you try to prevent damage, the more you distance yourself from authenticity. Until you start to wonder, what am I even protecting? Who is this version of me I'm fighting so hard to avoid becoming? You search for answers, you dig through your past. You look for the moment when you decided your real self wasn't enough. Sometimes it's obvious. a parent who only loved the good version of you, a friend who turned cold when you were honest, a mistake that cost you everything. Sometimes it's subtle. A slow accumulation of feedback, of corrections, of lessons that taught you, don't be that version, be this one instead. And so you did. You became the safer version, the cleaner edit, the one who's always 3 steps ahead, and it worked. You kept things together, you avoided collapse, but the paradox remained. Because in trying to prevent a future version of yourself from failing, you prevented a present version of yourself from living, and now you don't know which version is real. You say, I don't know who I am anymore. But maybe you never did. Maybe you've only known who you're afraid of becoming, and every move you make is in reaction to that fear. You live in preemptive strikes against yourself, and you're tired, so tired, because being two people all the time is exhausting. The planner and the planned, the speaker and the censor, the one who feels and the one who filters. You're always on edge, always calculating, always predicting your own downfall before anyone else can. But what if you stopped? What if you let the feared version of you speak? What if you let them act, even just once? What if you gave them a CH? Ants to show they're not a villain, but a version of you waiting to be believed. The paradox says that you try to avoid becoming something, and in doing so you become something else entirely. But what if both versions are incomplete? What if the wholeness lives in the space between, not the preemptive self and not the raw impulse, but the union, the integrated version, the one who doesn't suppress the future but carries it with awareness, the one who doesn't punish the past but listens to it, one who doesn't fear who they might be because they've already decided to love who they are. That version isn't safe, but it's real, and maybe that's the point. You don't exist to avoid mistakes. You exist to make them, to grow from them, to become because of them, not around them, not in spite of them, through them. So if you're always looking ahead, always predating your life to avoid being the wrong version of yourself, maybe you've never really lived it at all. Maybe the life you're protecting isn't yours yet. And if that's true, maybe it's time to stop fearing who you might become and start wondering who you were meant to be all along. The mirror memory paradox is what happens when the past you rely on to explain yourself turns out to be a hall of mirrors, every reflection a little different, every surface bending the light of truth until you can't tell where the original ended and the copies began. You wake up one morning with a memory heavy in your chest, the smell of wet asphalt outside your childhood home after summer rain, the particular crunch of gravel under your bike tires, the way your palms stung from gripping the handlebars too tight. You could swear it's real. You can almost taste the metal tang of anticipation because you remember pedaling faster than you were allowed, racing the storm back to the house. It's vivid, alive, untouchable. But then, years later, you talk to your brother. He says the driveway was paved by then, there was no gravel that summer. He says you never rode bikes in the rain because Mom forbid it, and something inside you cracks. The scene you carried like a gemstone, polished by retelling, suddenly looks cloudy. You search your mind, trying to confirm the shape of the rocks, the sound of the wheels, the electric smell of ozone. You can't find them. Maybe they were never there, or maybe they were, but your brother forgot. Now your certainty wobbles. The memory you used to locate yourself in time has gone soft at the edges, like wet paper. It's still yours, but it isn't stable. You try to fix it by remembering harder, replaying the scene, focusing on textures, imagining the sting of raindrops on your face. But the harder you recall, the more the picture warps, because recalling is never passive. The act itself is creative, a rebuilding from scraps. Your brain pulls color from other afternoons, grabs thunder from a different storm, imports your fear of disapproval from last week, mixes everything in a neural blender, and serves the cocktail back with the label original. You drink it, you believe it, because it feels right, because it comes with emotion embedded like fragrance trapped in old wood, and emotion is persuasive, it tells you the story is true. That's the paradox. The more times you drink, the farther you drift from the real taste of that day, if the day even existed. You don't archive memories, you remix them. Experience is a master tape that's been dubbed, scratched, cut, taped back together, redubbed on a cheaper cassette, run through distortion, digitized, compressed into a lossy file, streamed, sampled, auto-filtered, and re-exported so many times the original frequencies are unrecognizable. Each playback overwrites, each retelling re-records. And you, the listener, swear the track is pristine. You anchor your identity in its melody. You sing along, but deep down you're humming static that's been carved into the shape of a tune. The paradox deepens when you realize your memories don't just change themselves, they change each other. A new detail in one scene ripples backward into earlier chapters, altering context. You remember playing cards with your grandfather. You always thought you were 7, but one day you noticed the design on the tablecloth didn't exist until you were 9. Now every memory with that tablecloth shifts. You're older, taller, more aware. Maybe the melancholy you attributed to him was just your own adolescent confusion projected backward. Maybe his silence wasn't wisdom, but your later longing for mentorship painted onto his quiet. The entire emotional palette of your childhood edits itself. And because you only ever interacted with your memories, not the past, they become your personal canon. You read your life like a novel, forgetting you're the ghostwriter. This is why two siblings can share a house and grow fundamentally different autobiographies. One carries a mother who was gentle but distant, the other remembers a mother who was stern but safe. They think they're arguing about facts, they're actually discussing drafts. There is no final manuscript, only versions. Which leads to another layer of the paradox. If memory is a mirror that copies itself each time you look, then every recollection is both true and false. True because you feel it, false because it's an interpretation. And interpretations mutate, so what do you do with that? Some people double down on certainty. They defend their memories like territory. They say, I know what I saw, I know what I felt, I know what happened. They barricade themselves inside a fortress of conviction, guarding the past from revision. But certainty is brittle. It shatters under pressure. One piece of evidence, one photograph out of place, one diary entry found in an attic can send cracks through the foundation. The fortress falls and the mind scrambles to rebuild, sometimes with conspiracy, sometimes with denial, rarely with peace. Others go the opposite way. They decide memory is useless, reality is subjective, nothing is knowable. They drift in relativism, letting meaning dissolve. But that's a trap too, because humans can't I've without narrative, we need structure, we need cause and effect, we need a story to explain why we are the way we are. So what's left? Perhaps a middle path, understanding memory as art, not archive. Art isn't judged by accuracy, it's judged by resonance. Your memories are autobiographical novels co-authored by your past selves and your present needs. They exaggerate colors, compress time, invent dialogue. They aren't supposed to be evidence, they're supposed to be guidance. They show you patterns. Here is where you learned fear, here is where you felt free, here is the shape of longing still unfinished. If you read them like that, they can heal you, but you must hold them lightly, knowing they'll change again tomorrow. They're living documents, not fossils, and that changes your relationship to identity. You stop saying, I am this way because I remember X. You start saying, I remember X this way because I need it to explain who I am right now. If you heal, the memory heals. If you grow, the past grows with you. What used to be a wound becomes a scar, then a lesson, then a story you tell with a smile. Same scene, different mirror. Does that mean truth is gone? No, it means truth is layered. There's empirical truth, the rainfall total, the timestamp on a photo. And there's narrative truth, the meaning you assign. Narrative truth is allowed to evolve. The rainfall stays the same, but how wet it made you feel, that's yours to reinterpret. Accepting the mirror memory paradox also lets you extend grace. If someone else remembers hurting you and you remember the opposite, maybe neither is lying. Maybe their mirror broke in places yours didn't. And if you can both admit the fragility, maybe you meet in the middle where healing happens. Because the point isn't to prove whose memory wins. The point is to honor the feelings inside them. Your brain's job is not to report reality, it's to keep you alive. If rewriting a memory helped you survive, that rewrite was functional. But maybe you don't need that version anymore. Maybe you can replace it with one that serves who you are becoming. This is the liberation buried in the paradox. If the past is partly a creation, you have creative control moving forward. You can retell the story, not to lie but to emphasize hope, to find value in pain, to acknowledge resilience where you once saw only failure. Neuroplasticity shows your brain literally rewires when you recall with new context. You sculpt your neural landscape every time you revisit an event. Why not sculpt toward light, toward empathy for your younger self, toward understanding for those who hurt you, not to excuse them but to unchain yourself from their shadow? Remember, mirrors don't only reflect, they can redirect. They can angle sunlight into dark rooms. They can signal across distances. Your memories can do the same if you aim them. But first you must accept they are mirrors, not windows. You're not looking out onto a preserved scene. You're looking into a reflection shaped by who you are now, standing in the present light. The original room may be gone, demolished, rebuilt. That's okay. The reflection can still teach you. One last twist, the paradox applies to projections of the future too. When you imagine tomorrow, you're creating a memory in advance, then you live toward it. If your imagined future is bleak, you might behave in ways that confirm it. If it's hopeful, you might move in ways that realize it. So the mirror doesn't just face backward, it faces forward too. Past and future are both reflections bending toward your present gaze. The only time that's real, the only solid ground, is the instant you're breathing in. And even it vanishes the moment you notice it, refracted through thought. That realization could paralyze you or free you to live more gently. Free you to hold memories as guides, not masters. Free you to rewrite what no longer serves. Free you to allow others their reflections without demanding they look identical to yours. Because in the end, none of us sees the original scene. We see echoes. And if we learn to share those echoes with care, maybe they harmonize into something true enough to build love on, true enough to build meaning on, true enough to wake up tomorrow and try again. That is the mirror memory paradox. The past is a mirror that remembers your last glance, not the first. Look wisely. The silent applause paradox is what happens when your self-worth depends on the recognition of others, but the recognition you receive can never reach the parts of you that crave it most. It begins the first time you do something for praise. Maybe you draw a picture and a parent smiles. Maybe you answer a question in class and the teacher nods approvingly. Maybe you tell a joke and your friends laugh. The feeling lands like sparkles on water, warm, bright, undeniable. You feel seen. You feel alive. So you do it again. You start chasing that glow, shaping your actions around the hope of applause, and for a while it works. Every compliment deposits coins in the jar of your identity. Every laugh becomes a mirror reflecting someone you like, a version of yourself solid enough to touch. But applause, by nature, is fleeting. It stops as soon as hands grow tired, as soon as the crowd moves on, as soon as the moment ends. The applause dies down and the lights dim, and suddenly you're backstage with makeup smudged, wondering if the cheers were ever meant for you or just the costume you wore. You replay the sound in your head, trying to keep its warmth alive, but memory is a poor heater. The silence between shows grows heavier each time. So you chase a louder crowd, a bigger stage. You learn new tricks, you polish your act, you become really good at reading what people want and giving it to them. You anticipate their laughter, their tears, their admiration. You time your pauses perfectly. You become a conductor of other people's reactions, an artist of applause, and on the outside it looks like success. People say you're talented, charismatic, unstoppable. They invite you in, put you on lists, post your highlights. The metrics climb. The numbers glow, but deep inside something's wrong. Because applause is sound, and sound can't travel where you need it most. It can't soak into the hidden rooms of insecurity, the secret corners shame built long ago. The cheers bounce off the surface, leaving the emptiness beneath untouched. You tell yourself you'll feel whole when the next milestone hits, when the next achievement locks in. You picture a giant vault in your chest that will finally fill to the brim. But every time you open it, it's as hollow as before, echoing back the applause without absorbing any of it. That's the paradox. The louder the external approval, the quieter the internal reception. The more people clap, the less you believe them. At first you think it's imposter syndrome, then you think it's humility, then you realize it's neither. It's an architectural flaw in the human psyche. The applause is wired to reach the ears, but the doubt lives deeper, under layers of self-critique that no decibel can penetrate. The people outside see the performance. The person inside sees the rehearsal, the missteps, the compromises, the desperation painted over with charm. Start hearing subtext in every compliment. Your amazing becomes keep dancing and we'll keep clapping. You're so talented morphs into don't stop or we'll forget you. Each cheer contains a ticking clock, perform again, perform better, and so you do. You sacrifice sleep for mastery, relationships for opportunity, authenticity for marketability. The show grows extravagant, the crowd grows immense, yet the applause grows quieter, not because they stopped cheering, but because your mind adapted. What once was thunder now sounds like rain on a distant roof. Pleasant but indistinct, your receptors have numbed. One night after a flawless performance, you stand alone in a hotel room far from home. Your heart is buzzing with leftover adrenaline. Your timeline is exploding with praise. Yet you feel not elated but exhausted, hollowed out by the effort of staying worthy. You scroll through accolades that feel like they're addressed to a stranger wearing your skin. The silence between notifications feels louder than any stadium. You realize you don't remember the last time someone saw you without the costume, without the script. You don't remember the last time applause frightened you because you hadn't asked for it. And then a more terrifying thought. Maybe you've never shown anyone the real you. Maybe you've been curating reactions so long that no one, possibly not even you, knows what spontaneous self looks like. If the crowd stopped clapping, would you keep moving? Would you still speak? Would you still laugh? You recall a childhood memory, playing alone, humming, building worlds out of lint and light. No audience, just wonder. The memory feels like a message in a bottle from someone you abandoned. Someone who created for the joy of creating, who shared not to be validated but to connect. Where did that kid go? Did applause drown their voice? Did silence scare them into hiding? You want to find them again, but you're trapped inside your own paradox. You need permission to step off stage, yet you believe permission comes from the crowd. You need Islands to rediscover your voice, yet silence terrifies you because silence feels like death to a performer's identity. The only way out is through the quiet. You have to choose to stop clapping for yourself vicariously through others. You have to walk into a room with no lights, no audience, and create something no one will ever see. A poem, a melody, a wooden spoon carved badly. Let it be mediocre. Let it be private. Let it disappoint every internal critic that says everything must be shareable, scalable, perfect. At first the quiet will roar, the absence of validation will itch like a phantom limb. You'll reach for your phone the way a drowning person reaches for a raft, but if you resist, if you breathe, something soft will surface. A small pulse, a faint echo, the applause you never heard because you weren't listening in the right direction. Not outward, inward, not from many, from one. You'll write a sentence that no one corrects. You'll sing a note that cracks and smile because it cracked. You'll fail at a sketch and feel delighted because the failure taught your hand a new line. The silence will start to sound like space, and space will start to feel like possibility. You'll touch the edges of your desires, and they won't be shaped like hashtags. They'll be strange, unruly, honest. You'll still perform sometimes, because performance can be celebration. You'll still crave applause because recognition is human, but the difference will be where you store it, not in the vault of worthiness, but in the scrapbook of shared moments. Applause is communion, not currency. If the crowd cheers, you'll let the sound wash over and move on. If they don't, you'll still know the quiet place where your voice echoes back. And on a night when you stand on stage and forget a line, maybe you'll laugh instead of panic. Maybe the crowd will laugh with you. Maybe they'll see not the flawless performer, but the living person and feel closer, not disappointed. Because authenticity is an invitation silence extends. You can't forge it in noise. The silent applause paradox will always whisper. It will ask, are they watching? Are you enough? And now you can answer, yes, they might be watching. No, I might not be enough for everyone, but I am listening to the applause that doesn't need sound. And in that moment, you'll realize the paradox never needed solving. It needed noticing. Once noticed, it loses power because the quiet inside you is no longer mistaken for emptiness. It's recognized as home. If you ever doubt again, if you feel the urge to dance solely for the claps, pause. Picture the child humming alone. Ask what they'd create if applause were impossible. Then do that. And when you're finished, sit in the silence. Hear the heartbeat of your own existence appreciating itself. That is applause that cannot be taken. The paradox of the forgotten intuition is what happens when the voice that once guided you perfectly goes quiet, and the harder you listen for it, the further it fades. It begins in childhood when intuition speaks loud and clear. You know when to trust, when to flee, when to explore. You feel danger like static in your bones, joy like sunlight under your skin. You pick friends by magnetic pull, you draw pictures without asking what they mean, you dance before anyone teaches you steps. Everything inside you says, do this, and you don't question it. The world is a field of signals, and your body reads them effortlessly, the way birds read wind. Then something changes. School teaches rules, parents teach caution, peers teach belonging. You learn to override impulses, sit still, raise your hand, color inside lines, choose sensible shoes. Why did you do that? Becomes a quiz you can fail. Because I felt like it is marked wrong. Slowly, your intuition is filed under childish things. You trade instinct for instruction. You start asking, is this okay, before you act. You start checking faces for approval. You start waiting for evidence, for data, for consensus. The inner voice, once trusted, becomes suspect. Years pass, you grow fluent in external languages, analysis, productivity, etiquette. You build a life on goals aligned with spreadsheets and calendars. You tick boxes, hit milestones, collect praise. From the outside, you're thriving. But inside, something's missing. Decisions feel heavier. Paths feel foggy. You stare at pros and cons lists that multiply like weeds. You research everything, jobs, diets, relationships, until options bloom into paralysis. You think you're being smart, but you're actually starving the part of you that once navigated complexity without calculations. One day you remember a moment from childhood, standing at the edge of the playground deciding whether to jump from the high bar. Your heart pounded, your courage whispered yes. You jumped, flew, landed hard, laughed. You can still feel the bark chips under your knees, the burst of triumph in your lungs. No data guided that leap, only the pure, wordless certainty that you could. Where did that certainty go? Why can't you access it now when stakes are higher and maps are useless? You start hunting for intuition like a lost heirloom. You meditate, journal, pull tarot cards, shuffle playlists for synchronicity. You read books with titles like Awaken the Inner Compass and Rewild Your Knowing. You think if you just get quiet enough, the voice will return. But the silence fills with worry instead. What if intuition was never real? What if gut feelings are just neurons guessing? What if trusting yourself is irresponsible in a world that rewards proof? The paradox tightens. Intuition withers from neglect, so you can't rely on it. But because it's weak, you watch it fail. And each failure becomes proof it can't be trusted. You feel a spark, call a friend, but they're busy and you self-scold, see impulse is unreliable. You feel a tug, turn down a job, but the next month money's tight and you label the tug foolish. Confirmation bias piles up. Intuition goes from faint to silent. Then comes a breaking point. A decision no spreadsheet can solve, stay or leave, yes or no, fight or forgive. Logic loops, facts conflict, mentors disagree. You lie awake, mind spinning like an overloaded processor. In the stillness before dawn, a tiny signal surfaces, an image, a sensation, a whisper. It says, you already know. Your chest warms, tears rise, for a moment clarity. Then the mind shouts it down. Prove it. The signal fades. You sign the contract you're supposed to sign, or stay in the place you're supposed to stay. Months later, consequences bloom like mold, and regret tastes like metal on your tongue. Now doubt becomes something else, grief. You grieve the voice you ignored. You remember other times it spoke, times you met someone and instantly sensed danger but smiled anyway, times you felt drawn to an opportunity but hesitated until it vanished, times you stayed quiet when every cell screamed speak. You tally the costs, missed chances, needless hurts, relationships entered too fast, exits made too late. Each item on the list is a testament to a knowing you possessed and then betrayed. So how do you rebuild trust with a voice you silenced? You start small. You eat when you're hungry, not when the clock says lunch. You rest when fatigue whispers, not when screens tell you it's time to sleep. You walk without GPS, letting your body decide left or right at each corner. You ask your gut simple questions, coffee or tea, call now or later. You obey the first answer, no matter how trivial. At first it's awkward, like talking to a friend you ghosted years ago. Intuition speaks in hunches, half-formed images, somatic nudges. You misinterpret, you overanalyze, but over weeks something shifts. The more you act on hints, the stronger they get. Pattern. S emerge, you notice the body tightens when a choice is wrong, expands when it's right. You notice déjà vu moments guiding you away from accidents of timing. You notice clarity arises not in thinking about the answer, but in feeling into it. Then comes a test, a big one. A job offer glittering with status but heavy with misalignment. Everyone says take it. Your bank account agrees, your resume preens, but deep inside a chill, a quiet contraction. The thought of that office drains color from your mind. You've learned to decode the signal, this is a no, you turn it down, there's fear but also relief like a knot loosened. Weeks later, another path opens, less shiny, more true. You feel alive again, amazed you almost missed it. Each success writes new code over the doubt. Intuition blossoms not as noise, but as a trusted advisor with its own language. You stop asking it to argue in logic's courtroom. You let logic push numbers, but intuition steers the wheel when numbers conflict with aliveness. They become partners, mind as map, intuition as compass. One sees terrain, the other senses weather. Together, they navigate complexity. But the paradox never disappears, because the moment you stop listening, the voice will fade again. Intuition is relational. It demands reciprocity. Ignore it long enough and it retreats, not to punish you, but because it speaks in a bandwidth easily jammed by outside noise. Its wisdom is evergreen, but its volume depends on trust. There will be times you can't hear it, under trauma, in grief, during illness. That's okay. Silence then is not betrayal but protection. Intuition may dim so you can focus on healing. When noise settles, it returns. Your job is to keep space for it, to remember it's there, to invite it back without shame. And you must guard against counterfeit signals, anxiety dressed as instinct, desire disguised as destiny. The difference lies in sensation. Anxiety contracts with fear, intuition expands with quiet certainty. Desire sizzles on the skin, intuition hums in the bones. But you learn these nuances only by living them, by acting, failing, reflecting. Intuition is not perfect. It's a compass, not GPS. It points true, but you must choose steps. Mistakes will happen. They refine the dialogue. One day you meet a child, maybe your own, maybe a stranger, spinning in the grass, dizzy with unfiltered delight. They stop, eyes bright, and decide they want to show you a secret hideout they just know is nearby. Part of you wants to redirect, schedule, safety, sense, but a deeper part remembers. You follow. 10 minutes later you're under a canopy of leaves, dappled light flickering like the inside of memory. You realize the path here wasn't on any map, yet it feels inevitable. The child grins, intuition validated. You grin back, intuition reborn. The paradox resolves in moments like these, not by erasing doubt but by dancing with it. By knowing that knowledge is never complete, plans are never perfect, but the body carries wisdom older than thought. When you forget that wisdom, life drifts grayscale. When you remember, color returns. So you build rituals, morning stillness, evening gratitude, questions asked into quiet hearts. You surround yourself with people who honor their own knowing. You reduce noise, too many opinions drown subtle truths. You make art without purpose because play is intuition's native tongue. You spend time in nature where decisions belong to wind and root. Gradually, forgotten intuition becomes familiar intuition, not louder than intellect but equal, not infallible but indispensable. And now, when faced with a fork in the road, you no longer freeze. You pause, breathe, notice the body's weather. You weigh facts, but you also listen for the hum. If hum and facts agree, you proceed with confidence. If they diverge, you investigate. Is fear disguising itself? Is ego clutching an outcome? Or is intuition steering you away from a polished trap? You don't always choose right, but rightness feels different now, less about outcome, more about integrity with inner truth. Even missteps become teachers. You thank them and adjust, because the goal was never perfect foresight. The goal was reunion with the voice you buried under pragmatism, under performance, under other people's plans. The forgotten intuition paradox taught you something profound, that the guidance you longed for was never lost, it was waiting, and forgetting it was part of the lesson. In losing trust, you learned discernment. In misalignment, you learned to feel the click of yes. In noise, you learned the music of quiet. So when someone asks, "How do I find my purpose?" you might answer, "Listen to what you once knew before the world taught you to doubt, then act like you still believe it." They'll ask for proof, you'll smile. Intuition doesn't give proof, it gives direction. The proof comes after, in the life that unfolds, in the peace that grows, in the way your heart beats steady. Dies when mind and body finally remember they're on the same side. That is the resolution of the forgotten intuition paradox. The realization that forgetting is temporary, but intuition is perennial, rooted deeper than memory, blooming whenever you make space for its quiet, undeniable yes.